Welcome to the 94th Annual General Meeting of the Radio Society of Great Britain. I'm Steve Thomas, M1ACB, the RSGB General Manager and Company Secretary. We start with a few administrative points. The format of the online Annual General Meeting was agreed by the Board of the Radio Society of Great Britain in February 2021. The calling notice, previous minutes and election details were published in the April 2021 edition of RADCOM and on the Society's website at rsgb.org/AGM, together with the annual report and financial statements. Paid up members of the Society have been able to vote online or by post. The voting has been conducted by Civica Election Services on behalf of the Society, and the ballot closed at 0900 on the 22nd of April 2021. Members have also been able to submit questions to the Board of Directors in advance of this meeting. The submission of those questions also closed at 0900 on the 22nd of April. These proceedings have been recorded and will be available via the Society's website in due course. As you know from our Articles of Association, any resolutions to be considered by the meeting must be submitted 21 days in advance. We've received no resolutions and the meeting will be as set out in the calling notice. During the formal AGM, previously submitted questions will be addressed as they relate to particular agenda items, or separately during the subsequent session if they relate to more general work of the Society or amateur radio matters. We are presenting this live, but if technology and the live stream stops, the AGM will continue and the results will be announced via other communications channels. It is now my pleasure to introduce the Society's Chairman, Ian Shepard, G4 EVK.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Society's Annual General Meeting. Before we start the formal business, let me confirm that this meeting is the Annual General Meeting dealing with the business as described in the calling notice. After the meeting, I will ask the President, Dave Wilson, M0OBW, to present a review of 2020, which will be followed by the presentation of awards. We will then continue with a session to answer previously submitted questions. After the formal meeting concludes, there will be an update on the new EMF license regulations by John Rogers, M0JAV. We now turn to the formal meeting, the 94th Annual General Meeting. The President, Dave Wilson, M0OBW, the General Manager and Company Secretary, Steve Thomas, M1ACB, and the Honorary Treasurer, Richard Horton, G4AOJ, will be contributing to this meeting. Also joining the online meetings are members of the board, senior members of staff, and the elections officer, Stephen Purser, GW4SHF. We have Stuart Bryant, G3YSX, and Len Paget, GM0ONX, who lead the Participation and Diversity Strategic Objectives, and are board liaisons for the operating team, which includes contests, trophies, awards, emergency comms, repeaters, amateur radio direction finding, and the operating advisory service. Andy Mace, M0MUX, and John Rogers, M0JAV, who lead the research and growth objectives and are the liaison directors for the innovation delivery team, which includes ARIS, the youth team, EMC, EMF, and the propagation studies activities. Dave Wilson, M0OBW, leading the representation team, works with IARU and our objectives of spectrum management and organisation. Dave has also recently been helping the learning team with work on examinations. John Spurgeon, G4LKD, leading our growth and membership strategic objectives and board liaison for the learning team, including special interest groups, the Beyond Exams team, and accessibility. Myself as chair, together with Steve Thomas, M1ACB, lead the professional services team, which includes our HQ staff team to deliver our strategic objectives of growth, membership and recognition, and support the legacy, publications, including books and RAGCOM, National Radio Centre, GBTRS News Service, IT and communications activities, together with finance and membership services, administrative and corporate facilities delivery. We have not received any apologies for absence from this meeting. I now move to the published agenda. Agenda item 1, which is resolution 1, is to receive and, if approved, confirm the minutes of the 93rd Annual General Meeting held on the 25th of April 2020 and circulated to members in the April 2021 RAGCOM. It is not a requirement that these minutes are presented at the Annual General Meeting, nor is it required that we record any details of discussions on them, other than to record decisions made. Members were given the opportunity to submit questions in advance of the AGM to be answered by the directors during the meeting. We have not received any questions regarding this subject. There is a board motion to confirm the minutes. May I have a proposer, please?
I, John Rogers, M0JAV, propose that the minutes be accepted.
Thank you, John. Now may I have a seconder?
Len Paget, GM0ONX. I propose a seconding of the minutes.
Thank you, Len. The results of the voting show that the motion is carried by 552 votes and 0 against. Agenda item 2 is to receive and consider the accounts for the period 1st of January 2020 to the 31st of December 2020, and the reports of the board and auditor available online from the 1st of April 2021. I call upon the Treasurer to present the auditor's report.
Thank you, Chairman. The auditor's unqualified report, together with the statutory financial statements and other AGM material, were published online, and members have been given the opportunity to submit questions in advance of the AGM to be answered during the meeting. We have received no questions on this matter. Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. You will have noted that there is an unqualified audit, which is what we would expect. Now to the accounts. I will start by mentioning that there is no requirement to lodge the accounts, and the purpose of this item on the agenda is to give members the opportunity to submit any questions in advance of the AGM to be answered at this time. We haven't received any questions regarding this subject. I will now ask Richard to give a brief summary of the accounting period of 2020.
Thank you, Chairman. For the year ended 31st of December 2020, the Society reported revenues of £1,581,000 compared to £1,508,000 for 2019. The Society reported a profit before taxation of £76,000 compared to a deficit in 2019 of £53,000. The pandemic and the measures taken to deal with it impacted the Society in a number of ways. There was an increase in interest in amateur radio that positively impacted membership numbers and subscriptions. This increased interest also resulted in a marked increase in book sales and foundation examination numbers. Book sales were 366,000 in 2020 compared to 291,000 in 2019. This was partially offset by a slight fall in advertising revenues, reflecting the uncertainty faced by businesses supplying the amateur market. As regards costs, in common with other organisations, the Society moved to a largely virtual environment. From around March 2020, there were no physical meetings, and this substantially reduced expenditure on travel, conference facilities, and related items. The Society also incurred some additional costs to support the increased examination demand and home working. The Society did not apply for nor receive any government assistance in relation to the pandemic and has continued to pay its suppliers on normal terms. No borrowings have been incurred. The value of the Society's investments declined during the initial market falls in March and April 2020, but recovered during the latter half of the year. Overall, the Society reported an investment gain of 16,000 compared to 34,000 in 2019. At the 31st of December 2020, the Society's net assets were 1,425,000 compared to 1,334,000 at the 31st of December 2019. The board concluded that in accordance with good governance practice, it was appropriate to change the Society's auditors. The existing auditors, Sayer Vincent, retired, and following a competitive tender process, the board appointed Peters, Elworthy and Moore as the Society's auditors. The board expresses its appreciation for the contribution that was made by Sayer Vincent during their tenure as auditors. As the chairman has already remarked, we have received no questions on these accounts. Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. We are required simply to receive the accounts at this meeting, and there is no requirement to vote. So I will now move on to the next agenda item. The next agenda item is item 3, which is resolution 2, to appoint Peters, Elworthy and Moore as auditors and to authorise the board to fix their remuneration. The board is of the view that, at least for the time being, reappointment of our current auditors is in the best interests of the Society, both for reasons of cost and continuity. The board has therefore determined to recommend the reappointment of the existing auditors. I propose that resolution. Ian Shepard, G4EVK. May I have a seconder, please?
I second that resolution. Dave Wilson, M0OBW.
The results of the voting show that the motion is carried by 570 votes to 7. We now move to agenda item 4, which is resolution 3. This is to endorse Paul Devlin, G1SMP, and David Hills, G6PYF, as nominated directors of the RSGB to serve until the 2024 AGM. The articles require that nominated directors are endorsed by the membership in a secret ballot on or before the AGM. That is Article 33C. Paul Devlin, G1SMP, and David Hills, G6PYF, were recommended to the board as nominated directors by the Nominations Committee in January 2021. The board accepted the recommendation at its meeting of the 16th of January 2021, and Paul Devlin, G1SMP, and David Hills, G6PYF, are offered for endorsement in accordance with the articles. In accordance with the Society's bylaws, voting has been conducted electronically by Civica Election Services. Could the Elections Officer, Stephen Purser, GW4 SHF, please announce the results of the ballot?
Candidates are selected because they bring skills which would otherwise not be found on the board. I am the independent chair of the Nominations Committee, and I maintain a list of potential board candidates. I would welcome a discussion with any member with business skills which they would be willing to use to assist the Society as a board member. I can be contacted as nominations.chair@rsgb.org.uk. I will now announce the results of the endorsement vote. I can report that Paul Devlin, G1SMP, received 546 votes, endorsing him as a nominated director. There were 1 votes against, and no abstentions. I got there in the end. Paul is therefore duly endorsed as a nominated director of the Society and will serve until the 2024 AGM. I can also report that David Hills, G6PYF, received 556 votes, endorsing him as a nominated director. There were 17 votes against and no abstentions. David is therefore duly endorsed as a nominated director of the Society and will serve until the 2024 AGM.
On behalf of the board, I congratulate both Paul Devlin and David Hills and welcome them to the board. We now move to agenda item 5, which is resolution 4. This is to elect a president. The candidates are Dr. Stuart Bryant, G3YSX, and Simone Wilson, M0BOX, as the president of the RSGB and as a director of the RSGB to serve on the board. In this election, one candidate, Simone Wilson, M0BOX, has exercised her right under Bylaw 4.5 to stand for board director as well as president. Bylaw 5.4 sets out a different voting arrangement as a consequence, and members were asked to vote for not more than 2 candidates for board director. If Simone is elected as president and has the highest number of votes in the board director vote, then the person with the second highest number of votes will be duly elected. Otherwise, the board director successful candidate will be the one with the highest number of votes. Bylaw 5.4 allows members to vote for more candidates than there are vacancies in a board election, Resolution 5, so that their preference is still counted if one of their chosen board member candidates is elected as president, Resolution 4. In accordance with the Society's bylaws, voting has been conducted electronically by Civica Election Services. Could the election officer, Stephen Purser, GW4 SHF, please announce the results of the ballot?
I can report that Dr. Stuart Bryant, G3YSX, has received 360 votes. I can report that Simone Wilson, M0BOX, has received 280 votes. Dr. Stuart Bryant, G3YSX, is therefore duly elected as President of the Society and will serve until the 2023 AGM.
On behalf of the board, I congratulate Stuart and welcome him as President of the Society. Item 6 on the agenda is to elect a director, which is Resolution 5. The candidates are John Louis Spurgeon, G4LKD, Rob Wilkes, 2W0HQD, Dave Wilson, M0OBW, Simone Wilson, M0BOX, and Christopher Wood, GD6TWF, to serve on the board as a director of the RSGB. Could the election officer, Stephen Purser, GW4 SHF, please announce the results of the ballot?
I can report that the following votes have been received. John Louis Spurgeon, G4LKD, has received 197 votes. Rob Wilkes, 2 Whiskey 0 HQD, has received 103 votes. Dave Wilson, M0OBW, has received 354 votes. Simone Wilson, M0BOX, has received 280 votes. Christopher Wood, GD6TWF, has received 134 votes. Dave Wilson, M0OBW, is therefore duly elected as a director of the Society and will serve until the 2024 AGM.
On behalf of the board, I congratulate Dave Wilson and welcome him back as an elected director of the Society. I should also like to thank those directors who have stood down or reached the end of their term during this year. Finally, there were regional representative vacancies for 3 regions, Regions 2, 6 and 12. The following have been elected unopposed and their appointments start immediately after the AGM. Region 6, Liz Caban, GW0 ETU, And Region 12, David De La Haye, M0MBD. There were no valid nominations for Region 2. On behalf of the board, I congratulate Liz and David and welcome them to the regional team. This concludes the annual general meeting formal business. Thank you all for your contributions to it. We now move to the informal part of the proceedings, and I will hand over to our President, Dave Wilson, M0OBW, for a review of 2020.
Last year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had to hold our AGM virtually. We weren't expecting to be doing another virtual AGM, but sadly we've had to. This year, however, we've been able to expand the event, and hopefully it's a closer reflection of our normal AGM format. Last year was undoubtedly a difficult time for organisations and individuals. Many of us had lost loved ones, and everyone has had to adjust to life being very different. At the RSGB, we recognised early on that it also presented us with a number of new opportunities for connecting with people online, which I'm pleased to say we grasped with both hands. The overall result is that 2020 was the best year the Society has had for many, many years, but more of that later. That success, as you can imagine, hasn't been achieved without a lot of hard work, and it often meant a bit of thinking outside the box. I'd like to thank everyone who helped make last year what it was. The HQ management team under the stewardship of Steve Thomas, the General Manager. All the HQ staff who very quickly adjusted to working from home. The hundreds of volunteers who stepped up to the plate, and everyone who adapted to new ways of working. Thanks for a fantastic team effort. A huge vote of thanks must go to you, our members out there, who've stood by the Society and will hopefully continue to support the work the Society is doing. Let's have a look at some of the initiatives the Society undertook in the last 12 months. As I mentioned earlier, moving staff from HQ to remote working was a huge logistical exercise, providing each of them with the equipment and functionality they needed, without affecting the day-to-day services they provide to you, our members. As time goes on and the circumstances allow, we'll be bringing staff back into the office, but in a very controlled and measured way. We need to ensure their health and well-being, whilst not affecting the services and roles they each undertake. We kept the National Radio Centre open for as long as possible, but inevitably had to close it in line with government regulations. A lot of work has gone on to install or upgrade the radio station setup and the supporting PC applications in the radio room. The NRC's 80-metre net has run continuously every weekday, and slow Morse training sessions have been run by the volunteers. Very early on after lockdown was introduced, the RSGB's contest committee launched the Hope QSO Party Series. It was meant to be a 6-week initiative, with the primary objective of helping and supporting the many radio amateurs out there who were isolated at home and would appreciate contact with other radio amateurs. Well, 6 weeks came and went, and many people asked for a second series. We also ran a special series at Christmas as part of our Get on the Air for Christmas campaign. The whole series has been a huge success, and I'm pleased to say that the first Hope QSO party made 293,000 QSOs from 39 countries on 4 continents. I hope you've all heard the phrase, get on the air to care. That's undoubtedly been one of our most significant successes. It was created in an unprecedented partnership with the NHS, with the aim of supporting radio amateurs, countering social isolation, and raising the profile of amateur radio amongst people looking for something to do during lockdown. People are also encouraged to use Stroke NHS after their call sign to show their support for the fantastic work the NHS is doing. Examples of getting on the air to care never cease to amaze me. Just a quick example. Peter Valentine celebrated his 96th birthday back in May by contacting 96 amateurs and walking 96 miles as a thank you for the excellent services he'd received from the NHS. Amazing. Very well done, Peter. Within the Get on the Air to Care initiatives, there are a number of very different threads, such as Tonight at 8. These are live webinars which started in June, initially every 2 weeks, then once a month. Topics included Raspberry Pi, antennas for small gardens, and introductions to both SOTA and GNU radio. A huge vote of thanks to the team that made that a huge continuing success, including David and Tammy Palmer, Graham Bohr, Stuart Bryant, and the HQ staff. Not forgetting all the presenters. Thank you. Beyond Exams is another initiative that comes under the banner of Get on the Air to Care. The idea of Beyond Exams goes back a long way, but was formally launched in April 2020, with the coordinator, Chris Colclough, and Mark Burrows, one of our regional managers, making virtual presentations to clubs up and down the country. The scheme has 2 threads. The club scheme, which because of lockdown restrictions hasn't taken off as it surely would have done if clubs had been able to meet. There are still some significant success stories where clubs have made it happen. The second thread is the individual scheme. Being individual, there's more opportunities to complete tasks and challenges. But again, due to travel restrictions, it's not been possible to complete some of the activities within that scheme. Overall, considering the restrictions that they had put in their way, thanks to Chris and Mark's enthusiasm, the scheme has done very well. As a bit of early news, the learning team, which is where Beyond Exams initiative sits, are looking to relaunch, rejuvenate and widen the building experience Beyond Exams scheme. So watch out around June, July time for that relaunch. As mentioned before, the Get on the Air to Care campaign saw a number of tremendous successes. Not least was working with the mainstream media to highlight amateur radio in lots of different ways. Over 100 press releases were sent out for the launch of the campaign, and the media was given a steady series of interesting stories and updates throughout the year. As a result of this contact by the RSGB Communications Manager, Board Director Stuart Bryant was interviewed by BBC Radio Surrey, whilst BBC Three Counties Radio and BBC Radio Somerset ran interviews with the General Manager Steve Thomas. BBC TV's Points West did a whole piece around Caitlin Field, aged 10, who became licensed in 2020 using remote invigilation. More on that particular initiative later. The campaign was covered by the iNewspaper, BBC Online, and there were a number of other media interviews held up and down the country throughout 2020 and the first quarter of 2021, which you can see on our website. Whilst all these new initiatives were going on, the business of the society carried on, again not without its challenges. Committees had to change their way of working, no face-to-face meetings. The volunteer leadership team held virtual meetings. The regional team did the same, as did the RSGB board. But there were some milestones in the RSGB calendar that had to be addressed, not least the AGM, the RSGB convention, the Hamfest, where the RSGB has a huge presence, and the IARU Region 1 General Conference. As regards the Hamfest, sadly, along with all rallies throughout the UK, Europe and America, that just didn't happen, mainly because of safety legislation. The RSGB convention, however, was another matter. Obviously, it wasn't possible to run the normal face-to-face convention, so plans were formulated to run a virtual one-day convention instead of the normal two-day event. We ran 2 8-hour live streams, starting with a keynote presentation running across both of them. The first stream was called An Introduction To, and was aimed either at new licensees or people wanting to learn about a new part of amateur radio. The Learn More About stream was for people wanting more of a technical challenge. We had an expert technical team who used a tremendous array of equipment from 3 studios to provide continuous streaming throughout the day. Special thanks to Rob Chipperfield, Dominic Smith, David and Tammy Palmer, and also Jim Lee for their part in the extensive preparations and the day itself. Comparing the 2020 online convention to previous years' face-to-face events, the figures speak for themselves. Typically, about 500 would attend the in-person event. In 2020, on the day, approximately 3,500 people watched the 17 live and pre-recorded presentations, with over 32,000 views of those presentations post the event. Radio amateurs joined us from 24 countries, reaching as far and wide as India, New Zealand, Japan, Lithuania, Norway and Canada. Over at the NRC coordinator, Martin Baker, worked with a team of 2 socially distanced volunteers to keep the GB3RS radio station on air throughout the day, and we cut to the NRC in between the live stream presentations. The NRC team made 142 QSOs from GB3RS, including 13 QSOs via satellite, 9 of which were via QO100. Lawrence Micallef and John Gascoigne provided the live feed from the NRC and created some novel on-air signs to warn the NRC team they were about to go live. As Jim Lee, who works for the BBC, commented, "We were running 3 live studios that day with fewer than half the number of people who would normally be used for one BBC outside broadcast." Thanks again to the hard work of the staff and volunteer organising committee under the leadership of David Bondy. The team pulled off what was a great event. All in all, something to build on for the future. The RSGB's 2020 calendar had always included the IARU Region 1 General Conference, where normally we would send a delegation of maybe 4 or 5 learned people to make input on the Society's behalf. Obviously, that wasn't going to happen, so the Executive Committee of IARU Region 1 decided that rather than postpone the General Conference, it would be held virtually. I'm very appreciative of all the hard work the various RSGB volunteers, mainly under the guidance of Murray Nyman, Chair of the RSGB Spectrum Forum, put in to make the event, certainly from the RSGB's perspective, a success. Rather than a delegation of 4 or 5, we were able to field a team of around 12 to 15 who dropped into their various specialist working groups, committees, etc., as was needed, thereby spreading the load. Most of the core work originally planned to take place at the conference was able to be done. There were, however, a couple of key areas where that wasn't going to be possible. One was the Executive Committee elections, and the other was the workshops. The idea of which was, and still is to come up with ideas and initiatives as to what needs to be done, in AIRU's own words, to ensure a healthy amateur radio movement into the future. On a recent conference call on this very matter, it was very heartening and also worrying to hear that in the last 12 months, only 1 of the 100 member societies had grown. I wonder who that might have been. More worryingly, in my mind, was why other societies hadn't grasped the bull by the horns, so to speak. I'd like to think that the RSGB, on the back of what's been achieved in 2020, and with delegates who are able to think strategically, the RSGB will have a significant part to play in these forthcoming workshops. As is always the case, these events are an exchange of ideas. Hopefully we can pass on our experiences as to what does and doesn't work, and at the same time pick up some innovative ideas from other member societies. Moving back to the RSGB in 2020, Christmas saw the introduction of Get on the Air for Christmas, which brought together a few new initiatives, including a very successful construction competition. There was a plan for GB1NHS to be on air from the NRC, but due to additional COVID restrictions, those plans changed, so it was run from Paul Devlin's home, QTH. The NRC coordinator Martin Baker, also ran GB3RS safely for the NRC on 2 separate days, so people could make contact with the NRC radio station. The Christmas Hope QSO party ran over the holiday, with various other holiday nets run by clubs for their local radio amateurs. The RSGB also ran a charity auction to raise money for NHS Charities Together. The auction, if you recall, was for the virus-perplexed bug Morse key, which Roy, G0VFS, had entered for the RSGB's annual construction competition and won the lockdown category. As you might have seen, the auction raised over £2,000. We're grateful to Roy for donating this magnificent piece of engineering for the auction. December also saw Yota Month, where the RSGB youth team and a number of schools, groups and individuals participated with the call sign GB20 Yota to focus on getting young people on the air. Everyone likes to see success, but how do you measure it? How, for instance, do you measure the success of the Get on the Air to Care initiative? Well, one way might be by the Amateur Radio Newsline awarding the RSGB and the Get on the Air to Care initiative campaign their International Newsmaker of the Year award. Congratulations to Paul Devlin, the NHS and the RSGB staff and volunteers. Another might be by how far our messages have gone. In that respect, an external monitoring agency has calculated that potentially over 35 million people have heard about amateur radio through the media coverage of the Get on the Air to Care campaign. That's a huge number in anyone's language and exceeds previous initiatives by many millions. We know that many people have said that seeing the coverage in the BBC and other mainstream media is the reason they decided to return to amateur radio last year. I'd like now to focus on the challenges the hobby itself faces, such as the threat to the 2-metre primary band, primary throughout the world, but coming under pressure for aeronautical applications. Pleased to say, for the time being, that threat has gone away, thanks to the hard work from Iaru, including members from within the RSGB. As I say, it's gone away, but rest assured it'll be back. And we'll all need to be ready to defend the limited primary spectrum we have. WPT is another threat. Again, thanks to a huge effort from Iaru, particularly through its Region 1 President, Don Beatty, G3BJ, and Iaru EMC Coordinator, Martin Sack, G8KDF. Whilst it's not gone away, Don and the Iaru are doing all they can to ensure that spurious emissions from WPT are kept to acceptable levels. What's WPT? It stands for Wireless Power Transfer, which is similar in concept to the way some of you charge your mobile phones, but this time it's for charging electric vehicles. Another significant threat, if you want to call it that, I say it's more of a challenge, is the introduction of new license regulations for radio frequency electromagnetic fields, EMF. The RSGB's EMC committee, together with a similar team from ARRL, have got together arguably the world's 7 most knowledgeable people on this subject, 5 of whom are radio amateurs, to work on the matter. Together, they're liaising with Ofcom about revised license conditions and implementation dates for late 2021 and early 2022. John Rogers, M0JAV, chair of the EMC committee, will talk more about that in the second half of today's programme. That brings me to what I think has arguably been the most significant initiative since we last met. What's that, you say? Well, it's the introduction of over 3,300 new foundation licensees into this fascinating hobby. The progression of over 1,000 individuals from foundation to intermediate, and over 350 from intermediate to full. All this while people haven't been able to leave their homes, well, at least for much of the time. How did it come about? As many of you will have seen back in March 2020, due to COVID and lockdown, we had no option but to stop all exams. The risk to candidates, the volunteers administering the teams in the exams in a club environment, and to our staff was far too great. By that I mean the risk of being in close proximity and of contamination from such things as infected paperwork. After discussion and trials over a couple of weeks with Tony Kent, chair of the Examination Standards Committee, and Nigel Barker, the Examination Standards Manager, the Society introduced remotely invigilated, online-only exams. What we didn't know then was just how popular it was going to prove. In the first month, 113 candidates took a foundation exam. The following month saw 309, followed by 566 the following month. Phenomenal numbers in anybody's language. How does it work? Well, firstly, it's a huge team effort and is now more or less a semi-automatic process. Gone are the days when candidates rang HQ, sent an email, etc. to try and book an exam. The number of people requesting exam dates was so large, it became clear that Carol and Rhea couldn't process them all manually. What we needed was an automatic booking system. The process was quickly introduced, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It has its moments, don't we all, but it works, which is great. How do the exams themselves run? Well, that relies on a team of volunteer remote invigilators spread all over the UK, who essentially are the eyes and ears, making sure candidates don't do anything they shouldn't do. They do this using a video conferencing function, something that until COVID and lockdown came along, most people had little or no experience of. Once people had recognised that remote invigilation was the way forward, certainly under lockdown, we needed to consider introducing the other two levels, i.e. intermediate and full. The big worry we had was that if we introduced them, would we be able to cope? Well, with a bit of planning, an increase in the number of volunteer remote invigilators, a tweak or two to the actual invigilation process, and a tweak to the candidate booking system, we felt confident enough to launch remote invigilation at intermediate level and started taking bookings in July, with the full level exams following on in October. If I may, I'd like to say a huge thank you to the various training groups up and down the country who, along with ourselves, seized the opportunity to provide online training, which marries closely with remote invigilation. Some of the groups have, like us, and thousands go through their training programs. Without their efforts, we wouldn't have well-prepared students wanting to take the various exams. Thank you. Please keep up the excellent work you're all doing. What we have noticed is that we're getting candidates taking exams who in many cases have picked up a hobby that they've always wanted to take up, but just never had the opportunity to pursue. Remote invigilation has meant they can take exams despite work commitments or living far from clubs, running training courses and exams. To support both new and existing radio amateurs during 2020, we provided a lot of new initiatives. What did that mean for the Society? Well, at the end of March this year, 2,191 people had joined the Society for the first time, and 740 had rejoined. The RSGB has more members now than at any time in the last 10 years. It's meant a particularly busy year for Debbie, the RSGB membership secretary, who's spoken to and helped hundreds of people every week. Under the Building Experience and Beyond Exams initiative, the Society has produced a number of short practical videos, primarily aimed at foundation candidates who, because of lockdown, haven't been able to carry out the foundation assessments. The video series has recently been extended with useful practical skills videos, which cover what some might think of as being simple everyday tasks, such as putting a PL plug onto a piece of coax, making a balun for your HF aerial, plus others, but to newcomers can appear very daunting. The videos have received thousands of views, some great feedback, and have obviously provided another form of help and support to licensees in these difficult times. Thanks are due to all those that put these videos together. As we come to the close of this review, a few words about how we communicate with our 22,000 members, and as many of the other 40 to 50,000 active radio amateurs estimated to be in the UK who aren't RSGB members. Firstly, we provide 3 journals, the world-renowned Radcom, and the specialist supplement Radcom Basics and Radcom Plus. Radcom Basics provides information to new licensees and people who want to try new aspects of amateur radio, while Radcom Plus has the space to go into more technical detail for those who want more in-depth information. They all provide a great range of information to their different target audiences. We also provide the weekly GB2RS news service to amateurs inside and outside the UK. Producing those 3 journals and putting together the weekly GB2RS news is a huge undertaking. And again, my, and I'm sure your thanks, go out to the RSGB staff that put them together. We also have a team of dedicated volunteers who read the news every Sunday. In this day and age, we also need to communicate via digital channels, and both our website and social media have the agility to get our news out to a huge number of people very quickly. I'd like to take this opportunity to say a personal thank you to 2 people who've made a lot of what I've just described happen. They're Shepard and Steve Thomas. Ian, as you know, was chairman of the RSGB board in 2020 while all this was going on. And by the way, he's been chairman for the last 4 years. Ian's vast experience in running change management projects undoubtedly helped keep the board on the straight and narrow. Not always an easy job. Many thanks, Ian. Steve, as the RSGB's general manager, manages the HQ staff and played a big part when it came to implementing many of the initiatives, such as Get on the Air to Care, that I've just described. Many thanks, Steve. We've talked about the success of last year, but can we at this point just pause for a short while to remember those RSGB members that fell silent in the last year? Looking ahead, what's our next focus got to be? Well, it has to be retention, both in the hobby and the society. We have to find new and exciting ways to convince those new to amateur radio that the hobby isn't just a handheld radio and talking through local repeaters. There's so much more to the hobby, such as taking part in contests and the many and varied award programs, encouraging people to take part in the whole building experience beyond exam initiative, or trying other modes such as Love It or Hate It, FT8 and FT4. There's construction and experimenting with aerials. The list goes on and on, often getting the most out of the least and surprising oneself with what can be achieved, which then spurs you on to take on other challenges. We also have to retain within the society as many as we can of those 2,000 plus new members by making what we offer attractive to our members and non-members alike. We have to build on last year's successes. As is always the case, it's not going to be easy. It's going to involve a lot of hard work and dedication. In summary, you have to agree that the last 12 months were very different to the previous 12 months, and the next 12 months are likely to be equally different. I'm pleased to say that the RSGB as a whole, i.e. its staff and its hundreds of volunteers, took the various opportunities that were presented to them, ran with them, and turned them into a huge success. I hope we can all maintain that same level of enthusiasm, etc., in the coming 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave, for your review of this exceptional year. Now we turn to the presentation of trophies. We commence with the presentation of the major society trophies for 2020. These will be announced by the General Manager, Steve Thomas, M1ACB, and the President, Dave Wilson, M0OBW. Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So we start with the Founders Trophy. And the Founders Trophy is awarded for outstanding services to the Society. And this year, this goes to the people behind the hugely successful Get on the Air to Care campaign and all of the linked activities that helped to make 2020 such a positive year for amateur radio in the UK. Thousands were welcomed into amateur radio via remote invigilation exams. Initiatives such as the Hope QSO parties, the Tonight at 8 webinars, the online convention, the Get on the Air to Care for Christmas construction competition, and the NRC support nets reached global audiences of tens of thousands. The widespread Get on the Air to Care media campaign brought amateur radio to the notice of a potential 35 million people, many of whom heard about it for the first time, whilst for others it was the catalyst that brought them back into amateur radio. A year that saw amateur radio flourish despite the pandemic, and we pay tribute to the staff and all the volunteers who contributed so much.
Next we have the Jock Kyle Memorial Trophy. This is awarded to the Scottish Club Society or RSGB member thought to have done the most in Scotland in the field of VHF in the past year. This year's winner is the GMDX Group, GS8 Victor Lima. This award is in recognition for the GMDX Group's support to VHF operating in Scotland, which was resulting in an upsurge of interest and increased levels of activity. Through its publication, the GMDX Digest, sponsorship of the Celtic Knock competition, and trustees of support groups, it provides information of direct relevance and support to amateurs operating on the VHF bands in Scotland.
The next award is the Jack Wiley Trophy, and this is awarded to the Scottish Club, Society or RSGB member thought to have done the most for amateur radio in Scotland during the past year. And this year it's awarded to Billy McFarland, GM6DX. During the COVID restrictions, Billy has devised a free online UK amateur radio license course, which has had many subscribers whom he has closely mentored and tutored. Many of those students have donated to charity in thanks for the help they've received.
Next is the Courtney Price Trophy, awarded for the most outstanding technical contribution to amateur radio in 2020. And this year it's awarded to Steve Carter, Golf 8 EPA, for the campaign he launched in May 2020 edition of Radcom to encourage members to use Lelantos software to identify VDSL interference, and also for his ongoing work supporting the AMC committee.
The Ostermeyer Trophy is awarded for the most meritorious description of a piece of home constructed or electronic equipment published in Radcom in 2020. And this year it goes to Thomas Aldred, Victor Alpha 7 Tango Alpha, for Wide Dynamic Range Field Strength Meter, which was published in Radcom Plus, Volume 5, Issue 1.
Now we have the Norman Keith Adams Prize. This is awarded for the most original article published in Radcom in 2020. And Reinhard Weber, Delta Charlie 5, Zulu Mike, wins the award this year for his article that was entitled SSB Weaver Method, published in the March edition of Radcom.
The Bennett Prize, Golf 8 Papa Fox, is awarded for any significant contribution or innovation which furthers the art of radio communications. And for 2020, this is awarded to Jack Purdom, Whiskey 8 Tango Echo Echo, and Al Peter, Alpha Charlie 8 Golf Yankee, for Double Double Magnetic Loop, which was published in the February 2020 RADCOM.
Next, we have a trophy that's very close to my heart, the Kenwood Trophy. This is awarded for a significant contribution to training and development in amateur radio within the UK. And this year's worthy winners are the Remote Invigilation Exam Team. This award recognises the significant personal commitment given by the team to facilitate thousands of remote invigilation exams during 2020. Their help, kindness and support put candidates of all ages at their ease and made the online process easy to navigate. Their contribution has been invaluable. Without them, we wouldn't enjoy many of the successes we have, and it's provided a way for people to get started in amateur radio or progress through the licence levels during lockdown.
The Wortley Talbot Trophy, which is awarded for the most outstanding experimental work in amateur radio, goes to Peter Deneef, Alpha Echo 7 Papa Delta, for VHF Fields Inside a Car, published in the April 2020 RADCOM.
Next, we have the Harold Rose Plate, awarded for outstanding contribution to 50 megahertz. This year, it goes to Peter Lund, Lima Alpha 7, Quebec India Alpha, and Juliet Whiskey 7, Quebec India Alpha, awarded for significant contributions to 50 megahertz, notably from Svalbard to all over Europe, US, and Japan.
The Louis Varney Cup for advances in space communications, Dave Crump, Golf 8 Golf Kilo Quebec, accepts this award as chair of the British Amateur Television Club. His leadership of the BATC community, both in the UK and overseas, has been instrumental in enabling the QO100 satellite wideband transponder to be fully utilised, with many new DATV systems being developed since the launch of the spacecraft. This award acknowledges the exciting and significant contribution made by many members of the BATC, both in terms of software and hardware.
The Fraser Shepard Award is this year awarded for research into microwave applications for radio communications, and it goes to Andrew Anderson, Victor Kilo 3, Charlie Victor, and team. They've been awarded it this year. And that's for the development of 122 gigahertz equipment that's resulted in a breakthrough on this difficult band, making it accessible to hundreds of amateurs. Andrew acknowledges the following people in his original article in Dubos: Carl Harbeck, Victor Kilo 3 Lima November, for field operations, assistance and sourcing the surplus dishes. Noel Higgins, Victor Kilo 3 November Hotel, for field operations and assistance. Mike Lavelle, Kilo 6 Mike Lima. Alan Devlin, Victor Kilo 3 X-Ray Papa Delta. Dave Smith, Victor Kilo 3 Hotel Zulu, and others for ideas and peer review. Also, Tim Tuck, VK2 X-Ray Alpha X-Ray, has been involved with testing and has arranged the manufacture and shipping of the boards around the world.
The Don Cameron G4STT Memorial Trophy is awarded for an outstanding contribution to low power amateur radio communication. And this year it goes to Dick Pascoe, Golf 0 Bravo Papa Sierra. And Dick has been flying the QRP flag for many years and has been a key part of the GQRP convention organising team at Rochdale, Rishworth and the virtual convention in 2020. He's written books about QRP, has been a regular in the amateur radio press, Practical Wireless, RADCOM and other amateur radio magazines. As one of the founders of Kanga UK, he ran a very successful QRP kit business. Dick is a past president and current board member of the QRP Amateur Radio Club International. He's also the current secretary of the GQRP Club. All in all, Dick is a very worthy supporter of QRP.
Now we have a new award, the Les Barkley Memorial Award, awarded to recognise those who have made excellent contributions to propagation research and understanding, ranging from conducting original research through to spreading knowledge about propagation and inspiring interest among amateurs. This is the first time this award has been made, and it goes to Jim Bacon, Golf 3 Yankee Lima Alpha, who I believe held Les in the highest esteem. It's awarded to Jim for his work on sporadic E and the development of the EPI, E's Probability Index, and propquest.co.uk.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Dave. I now move to the award of the Society's two most prestigious awards. This is a great honour for me to introduce these awards. Firstly, the Calcutta Key. This is awarded for outstanding service to international friendship through amateur radio. And this year, this goes to Dave Wilson, our president, M0OBW, for initiating, developing and managing the facilities to enable remote invigilation examinations at all three levels. This resulted in over 4,000 candidates sitting examinations in the UK and abroad during the pandemic restrictions. Secondly, it gives me great pleasure to recommend the award of a Lifetime Vice President. And this is awarded rarely to recognising an outstanding contribution to amateur radio and is the highest honour that the Society can bestow. And that again goes to Dave Wilson, M0OBW, for his tireless devotion over many years to all aspects of amateur radio and the Society. I'm now pleased to welcome the President of IARU Region 1, Don Beatty, G3 Bravo Juliet, to present these awards. Don.
Mr. President, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, I feel very privileged to have been asked to say a few words here on AGM Day about the next two presentations, and more specifically, of course, about the recipient. My own history with the Society goes back nearly 60 years, when I joined RSGB just after getting my license. The RSGB stayed with me over the years, and I watched it change with the technology and societal changes as it adapted to remain in touch with the leading edge of radio communication and to provide a beacon of leadership on matters concerning amateur service in the United Kingdom. About 30 years ago, I became more closely involved in RSGB, ending up with 2 years as president at the beginning of this century. I learned at first hand what the task of being president involved, and it's a tribute to the person we're recognizing today that he has held that post for a total of 2 3-year terms. I first worked with Dave Wilson when I rejoined the board in 2010, a period which, amongst other things, saw the decision to create the National Radio Centre. Also, sadly, there was a little bit of local difficulty with a member of staff, which caused all of us enormous heartache. I stepped in to lead the HQ team in partnership with Dave as president. So, Steve, I know what it's like as general manager to have Dave on the other end of the phone, supportive but challenging. After that, I withdrew from RSGB involvement for a rest, only to be asked by RSGB to stand for the presidency of IARU in Region 1. So my more recent experience of RSGB has been both as a member and also as having RSGB as the second largest member society in Region 1. IARU represents the interests of the amateur service, as amateur radio is called in ITU, not only to ITU and the regional telecommunications organisations like CEPT, but also to the European Commission and to ETSI and CISPA, which are influential standardisation bodies. Only by having a coherent and coordinated global voice can amateur radio hope to influence the regulators and the standards bodies to maintain our spectrum in some sort of usable state? To do our work, we need just two things, some funding and some able volunteers. We're funded by a small part of the membership fee members all pay to their national amateur radio organisations like RSGB. A little over £1 of your membership fee goes to IARU to help our work. Volunteers are a different matter, and it's a great credit to the support from the RSGB board that so many of RSGB's volunteers willingly give their time to the work of IARU in leading spectrum and regulatory work in the region, in leading the emergency communications work, the satellite coordination work, in global coordination of EMC matters, and of course in active participation in a number of key committees and working groups which develop and implement IARU strategy. I know that RSGB comes under criticism from time to time from some of its members, but please understand that it is held in the highest of regard in international amateur radio circles. We're fortunate to have such a strong society representing our interests in the UK. In any society like RSGB, there are a range of views, perhaps from those who'd like to see the RSGB run rather like a large radio club, to those who see the strategic issues and recognise the need for RSGB, as one of the most influential societies in the world, to play a leadership role on the big ticket items. For if RSGB and other large societies don't run with the ball on the big issues, who will? Dave Wilson has been at the helm of the society through some great initiatives. You've heard about some of the more recent ones in his report just now. But these things don't come about accidentally. It's through working with the board and other volunteers in the society that support's gained for a specific initiative. And that generally means a lot of work for the president in influencing and encouraging, skills that Dave, in his quiet way, has in volumes. I'd like to pick out one particular initiative which Dave's been closely associated with and highlight both the national and the international significance of what Dave has delivered. Online examinations. Dave saw the potential of these early on and put his weight behind them. Initially, of course, they were a way of delivering the written paper. But now with remote invigilation, a new and exciting opportunity opens up, one of delivering the exam to your home. Ease of access for those who are remote from exam centres, and a great boost to encouraging more people to take the first step on the amateur radio ladder. And what a difference it made in times of COVID. But wait a minute, if it works for the UK, then it might work elsewhere. Distant countries with minimal infrastructure are often unable to deliver the concept of an examination. But with remote invigilation of exams, a regulator can subcontract the whole process with confidence. And so we find countries like the Seychelles and now perhaps Somalia have a way to formalise their entry route into amateur radio. There are other countries I know which will welcome the opportunity to use the remote examination route in the future. And this is a great example of a national society recognising the need for change and stepping forward to innovate and embrace the challenge. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you've heard from Ian, the Calcutta Key is awarded for work associated with international friendship through amateur radio. I can think of no worthier recipient for this, and it's with great pleasure that I asked Dave to accept this recognition. The citation, as you've heard, reads, for initiating, developing and managing the facilities to enable remotely invigilated examinations at all three levels, resulting in over 4,000 candidates able to sit examinations from the UK and abroad during the COVID-19 restrictions. But before giving Dave the opportunity to reply, I've got a little more to say. I'll start with a little background about Dave. Since gaining his amateur radio license in 1992, Dave's been a long-time member of the Widnes and Runcorn Club. He gradually extended his radio-related responsibilities and became a member of the UK FM group Western Repeater Group, later becoming its chairman, and joined the Society's Emerging Technology Committee. Dave's wife, Kath, was then asked to take on the role of regional manager for the Northwest. With, I suspect, little choice in the matter, Dave was appointed one of her deputies. Soon after Dave earned his M0 call, he sought election as an RSGB board director and was duly elected. And Dave and Kath then became the first husband and wife team to serve on the RSGB board. Dave is passionate about training and continues to run courses for entrance to amateur radio. Over the years, courses for many hundreds of candidates were run up to March 2020, when the first pandemic lockdown prevented face-to-face tuition. Dave was able to extend his influence in the training and licensing of new members when he became Examinations Quality Assurance Manager, and with Ian Shepard as Examinations Standards Manager, worked for several years to drive forward the modernization of the examination system. Their interest and shared passion for the examination system continues to this day. Dave was first appointed president in 2010, and during this two-year term dealt with that unfortunate incident involving a senior member of staff I mentioned earlier. On formation of an interim board to manage the fallout from the incident, Dave was asked to continue for a further year to ensure continuity and stability. In 2018, Dave was elected as president for a second time and again was requested by the board to serve an additional third year, which finishes this month. So you can see that Dave has contributed to every level of the society and has maintained his approachable and personable style throughout. I couldn't even begin to guess the hours, days, weeks, and months that Dave's contributed to the work of the society over the years. So in addition to the award of the Calcutta Key, the RSGB board has resolved that Dave Wilson should receive the highest honor the society can bestow, a life presidency. Dave, please accept these two awards, the Calcutta Key and the Life Vice Presidency, with my personal good wishes and congratulations, and the sincere thanks of the board and RSGB members everywhere.
Well, what can I say? Thank you, Don. Thanks to everybody. Thanks for everybody and all those kind words. Very much appreciated. I mean, I'm very pleased, and I'm also extremely humbled by these awards. I'd like to thank everyone who's helped along the way to achieve what we've achieved together. You don't do things on your own. You do things as part of a team, and that's what I always, that's what I've always promoted. I'd like to say a special thank you to my long-suffering wife, Kath. She's had to put up with a lot over the years. I don't know how many years now. But thanks, Kath, for all your support. Moving on, I mean, the position of board members, and I'm pleased that I've been elected back to the board. Position of board member carries with it huge responsibilities. Just because you hold a position doesn't mean you know all the right answers. Whilst I might have my own ideas, I'm always open to alternatives, always with the best interests of the hobby at the forefront. Over the years, you learn that what makes the world tick, what makes the world go round, is relationships. In the vast majority of cases, having an understanding of the other person's viewpoint, being open to those views, it is more likely to get you to where you want to be. In our case, for the good of the hobby and for the society. So, and that's about all I'd like to say. But say thank you very much. I'm really humbled for this. Thanks again for these two very prestigious awards. Thank you.
Thank you sincerely, Don, for your tribute, and Dave for your heartfelt response. Thank you both. In conclusion of the awards, I congratulate all of our worthy winners and wish them well. That concludes the presentations. On your behalf, I express thanks to the staff and volunteers for organising the presentations and for all the AGM arrangements today. The AGM takes much time and effort to put together, especially so this year, with inputs from all departments to ensure all runs smoothly on the day. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. We now have a 5-minute break where you can watch a photo montage of how radio amateurs got on the air to care during 2020. I'd like you to see how many people you can spot. After this, we will answer questions from RSGB members that were submitted in advance of the AGM. See you soon. As you know, members have been given the opportunity to submit questions in advance of the meeting today. Members of the 2020 board will now answer some of those questions. We are unable to share several questions with the meeting as the member requested anonymity, and some inputs were comments which did not require an answer. These were passed on and will be noted for later consideration. I shall read each question and ask the most appropriate board member to respond. Question 1, which comes from Kevin Stock, M0 Yankee Romeo X-ray. How do you see the current license structure and the failings of the 3-tier systems towards progression? And what are your thoughts on the beginner's license idea with a view as to what is good for the hobby? And I'll ask Dave Wilson to answer that.
Thanks, Ian. Maybe I'm biased, but I think the numbers speak for themselves. In 2020, since we introduced remote invigilation, nearly 3,500 candidates have sat the foundation license, which in itself is about twice as many as in previous years. And as I said in my review, over 1,000 have progressed to intermediate from foundation level, and over 350 from full from intermediate, both of which are significantly higher than in previous years. So it's my view, and those that I've spoken to, that we must be doing something right. I wonder what the failings are. I mean, some people have made that sort of comment in the past, but aren't able to sort of present any sort of evidence of those failings. With regard to the beginner's license, the foundation license is the beginner's license. What justification is there for another license tier? The subject of beginner's license has been, we've discussed it a number of times within the Examination Standards Committee, which, by the way, is attended by Ofcom. The results of the discussions is that no one can see what benefit a beginner's license would bring to the table, which, by the way, is a view shared by a number of regulators across IARU Region 1. So I think that we're doing the right thing. I think that answers it, Ian.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah. So question 2. Comes from Torrin Stolke, Mike 7, Sierra Tango Kilo. Are there any plans to update the website to make it more user-friendly and intuitive? I'll ask Steve Thomas to answer that one, please, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks, Torrin, for the question. We've started a project to improve the quality of the content on the website some time ago, and we did that by asking the volunteer teams and committees to update the information that they put on the website. We're constantly updating the content, and we add videos and extra details, and we link all of our news and our videos and our social media content back to the website, so we can add a bit more detail to it. But because of the recent media attention and the fantastic number of people we've had joining the society over the last year, and remember, we're now on a 10-year high. We haven't seen this many members for 10 years. So that puts in perspective just what last year was like for us. But because of all of that, we've seen a really enormous increase in the number of visitors to the website. So that gives us a great foundation. And we're moving on to improving the look and the functionality. So we're already working with an external consultancy to improve our membership CRM system. And that is what's behind the membership portal parts of the website. So we hope to launch that later this year. We're already working with them. Work is well underway. And then after that, we'll then extend that project to cover the other parts of the website. So yes, we have plans and we're working hard to deliver them.
Thank you, Steve. Question number 3.
Thank you, Ian.
Okay, yeah. And this comes from Henry M0 Zulu Alpha Echo. What successful measures has the board implemented to discourage contests for interfering with normal on-air discussions, particularly at weekends, and contests dominating significant portions of intra-UK bands? And I'll ask Stuart to answer that one.
Thank you, Ian. The board delegates the design of contests to specialist teams that fully understand both the broad and the detailed issues specific to the event. It delegates the adjudication of the events to another committee that has specialist skills in that aspect of contesting. The board input is limited to general policy, which is to encourage diversity in amateur radio activity so that RSGB members can participate in and enjoy all aspects of the hobby. Where a contest is organised by the RSGB and is expected to be a high activity event, a proportion of the band is normally set aside for non-contesters. This is clear, for example, from the rules of the popular winter AFS SSB event, in which nearly 300 UK stations participated this year, and which sets aside some part of the band for non-contest use. Similarly, on the 2-meter band, so for example, 2-meter SSB events, a proportion of the band around the calling frequencies and the GB2RS frequency is prohibited from contest use. The CSC, the Contest Support Committee, monitor infringements of these protected frequencies and take appropriate and proportionate action where needed. Additionally, where possible, contests are single mode, for example, freeing up the CW and data sections for the bands during phone contests. In terms of long duration weekend contests and considering HFSSB events, which I suspect is the central concern of the question, the RSGB organises a tiny number of such contests and even then does not always have full control over the rules. Unfortunately, the overwhelming majority of the contests causing the concern noted by the questioner, or I believe were noted by the questioner, are arranged by organisations over which the RSGB has no influence. The problem, of course, is made worse at the moment by poor propagation conditions on the upper bands, which has driven more activity down to 80 metres and 40 metres. And hopefully, as cycle 25 develops, this congestion will reduce as activity migrates back to the higher bands. Unfortunately, until that happens, the only mitigation is to use non-contest bands, such as 60 metres, or to use VHF, or to use a technology such as remote receivers to enhance the range achievable on other bands, for example, perhaps 10 metres. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Stuart. Question number 4 comes from Mike Franklin, Golf 3, Victor Yankee, India. And his question reads, would the board support more articles about HF and VHF contesting and contest stations and techniques in RADCOM? And I'd ask Steve Thomas to answer that one, please, Steve.
Yep, thanks, Mike. RADCOM is a hugely important part of our business, and it's a highly respected publication around the world for its varied and interesting content. The amount of contesting content is always a hot topic, though. And we get a roughly equal number of letters asking for more and less content about that subject. So it's always a tricky area. The balance of articles in the magazine is at the discretion of our Radcom editor, Elaine Richards. And Elaine receives a tremendous amount of feedback from members, as we all do. And she's very aware of the need to maintain the balance and give the members the content that they're interested in. You're very welcome to send your suggestions to the editorial team by emailing radcom@rsgb.org.uk, and I'm sure Elaine would welcome that. We had a number of other questions specifically about different Radcom articles as well, and I'll be responding to those by email after this meeting.
Thank you, Steve. Question 5 comes from one of our members in Norway. Peter Ebsworth, Golf 8, Charlie, Kilo, Bravo. Greetings. I read avidly through the CVs and personal statements and was disappointed that not one of all the candidates this year had a clear statement on the views of said persons regarding recruiting and training of younger people, not just children or teenagers, but would also include persons of up to, say, 25 or 30. Does the board not have an established policy for this to motivate these age groups more into amateur radio? And I pass that over to Andy Mace.
Thanks, Ian. Peter, thank you for your question. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Andy, M0MUX, came onto the board as director last April. Youngest member currently of the board by a good 20 odd years, and therefore took on the board liaison role for the youth team. Also look after amateur radio on the International Space Station and the technical forum. Okay, so good question. When it comes to youth, the kind of guidelines that we have is the RSGB youth team aims to inspire young people up to the age of about 25 into amateur radio. Just want to go through a couple of things that we're doing really at the moment. So the RSGB does currently give free membership to those in full-time education up to the age of 25, and to those anything if they're not in education up till the age of 21, they have to have a license. Unfortunately, it still requires a written application, but they can get that. The RSGB board is currently actively supporting IARU YOTA activities. We hosted the YOTA summer camp in 2017. We have a general policy where you know we encourage people of all ages into amateur radio. And the current youth team that's headed up by Rob Everard G2RE has done a lot of work on the what we like to call the barriers to entry that stop more young people getting onto the air. Just as an example, the most obvious word is exam. I think few young people like that word. Any parents out there, and one myself, will know that most young people don't want to study for an exam that's going to enable a future career, let alone one that's for a hobby. Some stuff that we're going to be doing, the youth team, we're going to be putting in some adult youth leader roles to help further progress our goals. If anyone's interested in helping us out in that, I'll give an email address at the end and would very much welcome an email. So I think looking into the future, which will take 2 minutes on this. We have some fantastic specialist groups that the RSGB run already. Some of them are kind of little interest to a younger age range. For example, and not criticising any groups that we have at the moment, the planning committee is unlikely to be seen and used by an age group that don't own property yet. It might benefit their parents, but not the youngsters themselves. So I think in order to attract younger members, we need to do a bit of research. We need to develop and create some new services and initiatives that show value to that younger age group. That'll enable youngsters to kind of get enthused like we did when we were young and enjoy that hobby. And I think ultimately it boils down to having the right people, a diverse board of directors and people that have got a passion for bringing the next generation of amateurs into the hobby and setting up the RSGB as a business to cater for that. So summary point really, I think, yes, youth is very important. But in my view, to increase numbers, we need to do a bit of refocus and modernisation. I think it's going to be a slow and iterative change process, but it has to be done with existing member support, no matter what that age range, and help put it in rather than doing a big bang change. As I said, happy to take any other questions around youth or any of the other bits I look after. So Amateur Radio on the International Space Station or Technical Forum. Email address m0mux@rsgb.org.uk. Ian, thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for your comprehensive query. I hope that satisfies the questioner. Question 6 comes from John Fellows, Golf 3 Yankee Romeo Zulu. And he asked, does the board consider that given the need for a positive working relationship with Ofcom, the RSGB is hampered in vigorously pursuing matters where Ofcom clearly fails in its legal duties, such as Ofcom's lack of interest in exercising their statutory powers and duties under the international radio regulations to protect the amateur radio service from harmful interference and their imposition of disproportionate EMF requirements? Quite a long question. I'm going to pass that first to Dave Wilson, who will then pass on some supplementary information from John Rogers. Dave.
Yep, thanks, Ian. Well, how to answer this one? Well, as you get older in life, well, what you realise is that life revolves around relationships. But you also realise there's two sides to every coin. From the RSGB's perspective, banging on the door while making Ofcom aware of problems, unfortunately, rarely results in a positive outcome. I'd like to think that within Ofcom, within the individuals in Ofcom, we have a dialogue, and they have a sympathy with our issues, but their hands are tied as to exactly what measures that they're able to take and bring to bear on things. Please, whatever you do, don't take that as a cop-out. I'm not advocating that at all. We should, and I'm sure we will, continue to push as hard as it's possible to defend amateurs, defend the spectrum. Sadly, not always in the way that some out there might think. We have to do it in a proper manner. As regards comment about the imposition of disproportionate EMF requirements, again, I'm not defending Ofcom, but please don't think they're singling out amateurs. The requirements that they're put out are the same for all radio users. Ofcom aren't alone in changing these requirements. From the 3rd of May, for instance, the FCC are changing their regulations to remove exclusions for equipment below 100 watts. So it's happening all over the place. I'm sure John in his presentation on EMF later will give details of the work being done with Ofcom to develop, pre-assessed configurations and simple approved calculators to demonstrate, compliance, etc. So I'd like to hand it over now to John for his response. John.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks, John, for the question. The RSGB does, through the relationship we have with Ofcom and the working together, when appropriate, bang on the door. We had a great example of that in the May 2020 RADCOM, where we continued with our campaign for VDSL, which resulted in over 120 people sending in complaints to Ofcom about the interference from VDSL. We are now pursuing Ofcom to try and find out what they're going to do about that and to get information of the steps that they took. The problem that exists is the definition of harmful interference. And I should stress that that is harmful with a capital H and interference with a capital I, which means it has a specific definition in the Ofcom world. And that definition is that it seriously degrades, obstructs, or repeatedly interrupts radio communication servers operating in accordance with radio regulations. That is great, but there is no level defined as to how to measure degradation, interruption, and there is a difference of opinion between what we as amateurs see as being interference and what Ofcom see as being harmful interference. In fact, in response to quite a large campaign when we had some very heated meetings with Ofcom on protecting the amateur service, we got them to summarise, which was published in Radcom, their position on the matter. And what they said is this: our duty is to provide advice and assistance. We do not have a duty to enforce, and we do not guarantee that interference will not occur. When deciding whether to investigate or take enforcement action, we are required to act reasonably and responsibly and maximise the use of resources, and to do so in a proportionate, accountable, transparent and consistent way. What we in the RSGB and you as amateurs need is to identify a statutory requirement that they're not fulfilling. Then I'm only too happy to go and bang on that door again. Thanks for the question, John. Back to you, Ian.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Dave. Question 7, this is from Robert Brown, M0 Oscar Romeo Oscar, and it reads as follows. Contest committee members are elected by the people they represent, usually on an annual basis. None of the present contest committee have been elected, but merely selected by existing contest committee members, resulting in stagnant ideas and leaving people with the impression of an old boys network. There is no indication that a churn, as recommended, has taken place recently. Will the board please address this and implement election of CC members in the time-honoured way by voting? And I'll ask Stuart to answer that one, please, Stuart.
Thank you again, Ian. So Mr. Brown asked about the contest committee, but first I would like to talk about RSGB committees as a whole. The RSGB members gain huge benefit from all of its committees. These committees enable the RSGB to deliver a scope and depth of service to members that would be impossible without their work. We are lucky to have access to their dedication, competence and professionalism. We could not afford to employ such talent even if it was available for hire. I would ask all members to thank the committees for the enormous contribution to amateur radio, both in the UK and internationally. To function at the level they do, the committees require specialist skills, and it is unlikely that a simple election process would provide the RSGB members with the strength and depth of talents that the current process provides. The method of accountability, the way accountability works, is that members elect the board of directors. The board appoints the chairs and the chairs appoint the committee members. A named member of the board is responsible for each committee and it is in routine contact with them. The board liaison member, as they are known, usually attends the committee meetings and is copied on their internal correspondence. At regular intervals, the board review the performance of the chair and, if appropriate, reconfirm their appointment. If an RSGB member has a concern about a committee, they should first address their concern to the committee chair, and if that does not result in a satisfactory conclusion, they should raise the matter for review with the appropriate BLM. To the matter of contesting, some years ago we split the contest committee into three. Two committees to focus on the specialist and difficult task of setting rules for HF and VHF events, and a third committee to run the contesting service. I cannot overstate the amount of work that these teams put into running 276 contests in 2020, and these were enjoyed by 1,650 UK radio amateurs, of whom 1,475 were RSGB members. In terms of contest innovation, in 2020, the contest committee organised the Hope daytime series of contests at very short notice. These were designed to provide a focused amateur radio activity for those in lockdown. The contests were constructed so as to provide maximum enjoyment for the participants that suddenly lacked routine face-to-face contact with family, friends and colleagues, whilst using a time and mode plan that minimized the disruption to regular users of the bands. As Dave has said, 6,600 logs were received from just the first of these series alone. In addition, the contest committee have been experimenting with the FT modes, organising FT4 events on HF and FT8 events on VHF. This is to understand how you would run an FT-based or MGM-based contest. During my tenure on the board, the CC have complemented the highly successful and itself innovative VHF UKAC series by contests with an FM mode to encourage beginners with simple FM equipment to learn about contests. Finally, and most recently, the Contest Support Committee worked with the awards manager to construct a new Friendship on the Air award. This is an award intended to encourage UK amateurs to hold conversations on the bands and was only practical through the novel and innovative use of the specialist software that the CSC has developed over time. If members have new innovations that they believe would make contests more enjoyable to more members, I would strongly encourage them to make contact with the appropriate committee chair. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Stuart, for your response. Question 8, and this is from Tony Miles, Mike 0, Tango Mike Zulu. The RSGB board and the administrative team is primarily populated by older people. How does the RSGB intend to address this issue of ageism in its management ranks? I'll start off that answering that question, and then Steve will add to it after. Those offering themselves for appointment or election to voluntary positions is really only constrained by the willingness of the individual, the availability of their time, skills and experience they offer. This applies to all board and committee appointments, including the board directors. The RSGB administration is coordinated by the volunteer leadership team comprising board, HQ staff, regional representative, committee chairs and leaders of specialist activities. These each lead teams of district reps in the case of the regional reps, who are very keen for more volunteers, and in particular younger ones. So yes, please let's have more volunteers. But I point out that many volunteers contribute many hundreds of hours to the service of the society, without which it would be difficult to sustain the growth and expansion achievements. For example, you've heard about remote invigilation today. You may not know that just between 2 volunteers, they invigilated over 2,500 exam sessions between 2 of them during the lockdown. A wide range of ages is represented in the administrative team, which I assume you mean HQ staff, and I'll ask Steve to comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and hi, Tony. The staff team has professionals of over a wide age range, and we recruit openly with no age parameters. We do that through advert and through interview, just as you'd expect from any professional organisation. The RSGB is a team of just 16 staff. That's 10 full-time and 6 part-time. And that team delivers services for membership, sales, finance, publications, exams, communications, IT, and the management of the National Radio Centre at Bletchley Park as well. So my team have worked extremely hard in difficult circumstances over the past year, and I'd just like to thank them again for everything they do, and we'll continue that hard work again next year.
Thank you, Steve. Question 9 comes from Rob Everett, Golf 2 Romeo Echo, who asks, our current licence system is designed by a group who are not elected by the membership. Why do the board believe that the views of those who set and administer the examination systems are in line with the wishes of the membership? And I'll pass that to Dave Wilson, please.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And thanks to Rob for the question. Well, essentially, I mean, if the license system or the exam system was determined by RSGB members, or indeed the 40 or 50,000 license holders who aren't RSGB members, we'd end up with something that looks a bit like a camel, wouldn't we? In that respect, the recent direct to full exam consultation, you could cite that as an example of this. There are a number of questions that were asked with yes, no, and maybes, and alternative, different categories, and those are easy enough to quantify. But there was also free text options on all the questions, and what we found from the, well, I think it's about 1,300 people that responded to that particular consultation. There's 136 pages of free text comment. Everybody's got their own opinion. Put simply, that means whatever process we're going to use in any form isn't going to satisfy everybody. Although the ESC and ESRG are RSGB groups, they have to be seen by Ofcom to be independent of pressure, so, to develop a system that is to advance the interests of the RSGB, to not develop a system, I should say, that isn't there to advance the interests of the RSGB and its members. Some members, for instance, might like it to be easy for their mates to get a license. There's a commercial interest to get more members to join the RSGB. If, for argument's sake, the members of the ESC or ESRG were elected, it would be very difficult for them to not be unduly influenced by the membership. The license system isn't determined by anyone within the RSGB. That decision is in the hands of Ofcom. The RSGB has an input and does instigate discussions and dialogue with Ofcom regarding revisions to the license level, for instance. But ultimately, it's up to Ofcom to accept the RSGB's input or not. They're the ones that have the final say. So back to you, Ian.
Thank you, Dave. Question 10, and this comes from Henry M again, Mike Zero Zulu Alpha Echo, and he asks, what successful measures has the board implemented to encourage young women, roughly aged 26 to 48, sustainably and actively into the amateur radio pastime, counteracting the image of a hobby for rich old men or children? And I'll ask Len Paget to respond.
Thanks, Henry. So this is something that I do understand where the question is coming from. Having two women within the family being licensed, my youngest daughter and my wife. A visit to any amateur radio event will show that we are most definitely not equally represented as far as the sexes in the hobby. That said, it's not entirely bad news. Girls and younger women are actively involved in the youth team and in university radio clubs, which the RSGB is always keen to support. We also have links with IET, who support both women and men of that age to get into engineering careers. There's many synergies between the aims of the IET and RSGB. RSGB volunteers at the NRC are always welcoming of all people of all ages, and they are absolutely brilliant explaining amateur radio and teaching all about it to anybody of any age, and it doesn't matter whether they're male or female. I have fond memories of my own XYL getting held up for some considerable time at the NRC, being taught how to send CW. She absolutely thought it was amazing. When we introduced the remote invigilation exams, we actually heard from a number of women for the first time they were keen to take the exams remotely, because they didn't always feel comfortable, going to clubs because of the domination of males in most clubs, or had work, family, or other commitments that made it difficult to set traditional club-based exams and training. Clubs will still have a large part to play in recruiting new people into our hobby, but it should not be a one-fit suits all solution. And we have a collective responsibility to encourage more women into the hobby wherever we can. And we should particularly make sure that our actions, whether they are intentional or unintentional, are not seen to exclude. We have unfortunate problems with one or two of our community having older thoughts about these things, and there can be an unintended chauvinism display these things, which we must try to avoid. It's very much unfinished business. We welcome suggestions, particularly from women themselves. I would really like to hear from those that are affected directly, rather than someone else who perceives there's a problem there. That doesn't mean the problem's not real. You just should get a better feel with these things. So if you have something that you have in mind that would encourage women in particular into the hobby, regardless of their ages, but younger women would be useful as well. That's a plan for the future. Drop them off an email, Golf Mike 0, Oscar, November X-ray, at rsgb.org.uk. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Len. Our last question, which is question 11, comes from Tony Miles, Mike 0, Tango Mike Zulu again. And it says, the RSGB has gained thousands of new members during COVID. How does the RSGB intend to engage with these people and to retain their interests and membership? And I'm going to respond on behalf of the organisation, I think, more than just myself. And I reply as follows. Our theme throughout this meeting has been to celebrate our successes in 2020. How did we achieve this success? Well, actions directed to attracting new people into amateur radio via multiple channels, and then to make them achieving an operating license as simple as straightforward as possible, whilst complying with restrictions that were imposed by the CV19. We prioritised, managed and delivered the systems to deliver that, and you've heard a lot about remote invigilation and the team that have been taking that forward. Once licensed and to support them on the journey, we used our channels to alert the members to the wide range of activities available within the hobby and how they might join in. The videos, the social media, Tonight at 8, etc. You've heard about all of those. You ask how the RSGB intends to engage with these new members. I suggest engaging more appropriate than rather intends to engage. And I may make a few points. At the local level, this must be through the clubs and our 80+ team of local and regional representatives, all of whom have access to details of all the opportunities and expertise within the society, and provide a local contact point for a wide range of queries. The team meet together as a monthly to share experience and learn of new and challenged opportunities that the RSGB is providing. Essentially, we shall continue to support learning, both for those newly licensed and those who have been on the air for several years, building on the already growing portfolio of education and interest videos covering all aspects of our hobby. Our regular monthly Tonight at 8 series of webinars led by experts who month by month focus upon different topics of wide interest attracts large audiences growing month by month. Additionally, the Society offers a number of moderated discussion forums where beginners and more advanced members may seek advice and share information in a safe environment. And of course, there's our Beyond Exams initiative, which has been, as you heard in the presidential review, the club scheme has been difficult to deliver during the COVID restrictions, but now is opening up, and we hope that that will become a good discussion area for those that are rejoining or those that have joined the hobby recently. Of course, there's always more that can be done. Ideas for new services of wide interest or suggestions of improvement of existing services are always welcome. Your local representative can ensure that suggestions are brought to the board of the RSGB for consideration and, if viable, developed and indeed implemented. Thank you, Tony, for your question. We thank the members for taking the time to submit those questions and hope we have answered them fully for you. All that remains for me is to thank everybody for joining us on this meeting today. We shall shortly receive an update on the new EMF license regulations, That'll be presented by John Rogers, M0, Juliet Alpha Victor. But first, during the AGM, we have seen photos of radio amateurs getting on the air, and we have heard a review of the highlights of last year from Dave Wilson. I'm delighted to say that we now have the opportunity to watch a short new video which draws everything together and gives us a whistle-stop tour of 2020, a year like no other. Thank you, everybody.
Hello and welcome to this special live webinar about the upcoming EMF changes to UK amateur radio licences. In March 2021, most UK radio spectrum users, including radio amateurs, received a letter from Ofcom explaining that they would soon be introducing new licence conditions aimed at protecting the general public from excessive radiation from wireless transmissions of over 10 watts. Although this may have come as news to some amateurs, Ofcom announced their intentions a while ago, and the RSGB have also been working on this for some time and has already published many articles and advice to members through Radcom and other channels. Leading this work for the Society is the EMC Chair John Rogers M0JAV, and I'm pleased to say that he's with us today to present an update on the latest EMF licence changes. So welcome, John. Can you give us a quick rundown of what you'll be covering today?
Yes, thanks, Dave. I'm going to outline some of the ways that individuals can assess their configurations, as they're called, to show that they comply with the new requirements and how they can keep records of that fact. And I just want to emphasize one point at the beginning, and that is to remember that although these new regulations come in next month, it is 6 to 12 months before you have to have done the assessments. Thanks.
Well, indeed, John, thank you. And before your presentation, a reminder that if you're watching this on Saturday, the 24th of April, then this is live and you can add comments and ask questions on either BATC or YouTube at any time during the presentation or straight afterwards. Please include your first name and call sign if you have one within the message. And also please note that you can make this video stream fill your screen on most devices, usually by double clicking on the picture or pressing the full screen button. But now it's time to go back to John and find out more about these new licence changes.
Okay, thank you. Ofcom introducing these changes next month, and basically they're going to implement measures to require compliance with international guidelines which limit the exposure to electromagnetic fields. So what's the license condition all about? In our stations, we all have an antenna, and most of us know that close to that antenna is an area where the electric and magnetic fields can be strong. That's called the exclusion zone. Outside of a region, there is a compliance zone, which is where you are compliant with the ICNIRP, International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection regulations, and that's where members of the general public need to be in order for you to be compliant. Now, the bodies, our bodies, are efficient at removing excess heat. When we run around, we sweat, we pant, we breathe faster. But if the rate of absorbing energy is greater than our body's capability of getting rid of it, then it can lead to harmful effects. Also, if the electrostimulation is strong enough, we may actually feel it. So what ICNIRP does is it gives guidelines to limit the exposure so that if you stay far enough away from the antenna, you can be sure that there's no harm. The guidelines are slightly complicated because there are basic restrictions, and these are the levels that are needed to avoid health effects, but they're measured in terms of absorption rate. In order for us as amateurs to define whether we're staying within the basic restrictions, there are also reference levels, and these are levels in terms of electric fields and magnetic fields and power density. And what ICNIRP does is it says that if you stay within the reference levels, then you will be satisfying the basic restrictions. Gets a little bit more complicated because there are two levels, one for people who work in it all the time called occupational, and one for the general public. There are two types of exposure involved. Local exposure, where, for example, the head is resonant at some VHF frequencies, and whole body exposure, where the whole of the body gets warmed up. And there are three types of measurements that need to be done: the peak measurement, a measurement averaged over 6 minutes, and a measurement averaged over 30 minutes. But basically what it boils down to is that when you are transmitting, the general public can be in a region where these reference levels are not exceeded, and the boundary of that region depends on the antenna type. But the most important message of the whole presentation just came up. If there's nobody present in an area when you transmit, then there can be no human exposure. So what it boils down to is defining your exclusion zones, which become a compliance boundary. ICNIRP actually specifies in a 41-page guideline document how to take the measurements. It says you've got to compare your electric field and your magnetic fields at different frequencies with the limits. You've got to do it for greater than 6 minutes and less than 6 minutes, but you don't need to worry about it. That is all done for you in the 41-page ICNIRP document. The reference levels that come out of this are to be applied for general public exposure. And what has to be done by the calculators or the assessment methods is to compare the electric, magnetic, and power density with the maximum levels, which are frequency dependent and are shown on this graph. Now, all of that looks complicated. It is complicated. And that's why we have a team of experts, 7 guys from RSGB and ARRL, who are working hard to interpret this for us and present ways of actually doing the assessment. So Ofcom in its document says that you can use a number of different ways to demonstrate compliance in the assessments that you take. So you can use a calculator, either the one that Ofcom themselves provide or other types of desktop calculators. You can follow manufacturers or installers' instructions. We particularly think that a major way of achieving it will be to use pre-assessed compliant configurations. And we published in the May Radcom and on the website the first of these, which was for HF dipoles. And we hope that that demonstrates the way that you can show a blanket compliance by setting a station up in certain ways. The other thing that can be done is to take measurements. That can be quite difficult. And I would particularly warn people to stay away from cheap field strength meters because they don't work. Field strength meters do work, but you don't get them for the sort of price that you can find them on popular internet auction sites. So you've got to make sure that people are not present in an area where the reference levels are exceeded when you are transmitting. Then, having used one of the 4 methods above, you need to keep a record of what you've done. And the best way of working this is to design your station such that it is compliant. And it's quite surprising how many people will find that that is the case already. So the new license condition, Ofcom have helpfully provided us with a flowchart. It's found in this document. And the first check that you need to do is, are you inherently compliant? And you're inherently compliant if your station is set up in a way such that it cannot transmit above 10 watts EIRP, equivalent isotropic radiated power. If your station doesn't transmit above 10 watts EIRP, then keep a record and the job is done. And in fact, our calculator helps by telling you whether that's true or not. If you are above the 10 watt EIRP limit, then you need to estimate the compliance distance, which is how far you've got to keep the general public away in order to stay below the reference levels. If you need to work it out, there are the 4 methods that I went through on the previous slide. And the important thing is that having done 1 or more of these assessments, you keep a record of why you're compliant and by what method. If you've worked out the compliance distance for the general public, the next thing you need to do is to work out some exclusion zones, which is where you've got to keep people out of while you're transmitting. So the first step that Ofcom outline in their flowchart is, are you or other radio amateurs the only people inside the compliance distance? If the answer is yes, keep a record of this, and as there's no member of the general public present, you are compliant. If general public are present, are you able to make sure that they're far enough away from your antenna or that they cannot access your antenna such that you can satisfy the requirements of separation? If the answer to that is yes, keep a record, you're finished. If, however, people could get within the compliance distance or in the exclusion zone, then you need to either stop transmitting or change your configuration if people become present. And you could, for example, turn the power down while the people are passing through the area. Let's just explain a little bit about compliance distance. This on the left, by the way, is the full flow chart. I'm not expecting you to be able to read that. I've been through all the individual parts. So on the right here, I want to explain compliance distance. Compliance distance is the distance from the nearest part of the antenna to the nearest part of the person. That's what's calculated by the Ofcom calculator. And if you can satisfy that, then you are compliant. One simple way is if your power is such that the compliance distance is less than the height of the mast minus the height of the person, then there is nowhere at ground level where anybody can go where they will exceed the reference levels. Now, we have developed a calculator. We have been going through various versions, and we really thank everybody for their very useful feedback on this. We will continue to improve that calculator. We posted a video explaining how to use it on the website, rsgb.org/EMF. You can find the video. We posted that last Friday, a week ago, not yesterday. And up until just before I started this presentation, there have been 4,241 views of that video. So if you haven't had a look, I thoroughly recommend that you go and have a look. And what it does is it explains how you can enter the band you're operating on, the mode you're operating in, the power you're using, the feeder and the length of the feeder, the type of antenna you're using, and it will calculate the EIRP. If that EIRP on average happens to be less than 10 watts, then you are inherently compliant. If not, you will need to look at the compliance distance and work out what the exclusion zones are and how you keep people at least that far away while you're transmitting. Calculations of this type are not an exact science. This calculator, which is based on an engine supplied by Ofcom, is conservative. That means it may require you to keep a distance that's larger than what might be compliant, but it does work. It is an approved calculator, and if it gives you an answer, then you will be compliant. This is another view of the same condition, but this time I've included the compliance distance And you notice that for this 20-meter setup, I'm feeding 400 watts in. I'm running SSB process, which gives me a 50% duty cycle, 50% mode factor and 50% duty cycle. I'm running through 20 meters of RG58 cable. I'm running to a half-wave dipole, and the peak EIRP is about 500 watts. The average EIRP is about 125 watts. And the distance that's calculated is this Ofcom compliance distance here. That's 3.6 meters. And I have a mast height of 5 meters. So my vertical separation is 5 minus 1.8, which is 3.2 meters. And in order to achieve the compliance separation at 400 watts SSB, you just need to make sure that no members of the general public are within 1.8 meters of the shadow of the line between you on the ground. And I think a lot of stations will find that they comply with that particular setup. So how do you determine the exclusion zone? You need to work out where people could be. You need to make a sketch of those, note the separation distances. You need to calculate the compliance distance or use lookup tables for pre-assessed configurations. You can mark these as exclusion zones on your little sketch of your own yard. And remember, limits can only be exceeded when somebody is present. So if you identify the accessible areas and the exclusion zones and where they overlap, then you can see where you are going to have to take steps to keep people out. So one simple way of doing that is to go to Google Earth or Google Maps. And I know this is quite small, but I don't know if you can see a mast luffed over there. So there's a position of a mast there. There's also a VHF mast here and a shack in between. So you can go on to Google Earth and you can use their distance measure to measure the distance from your antenna to, in this case, a public footpath. And that turns out to be 22 meters. The public might be able to get a bit closer, but there's some pretty dense vegetation here and some fences to try and stop them. So by measuring the distances, you can define the exclusion zones. By using the calculator, you can define the exclusion zones. By measuring the distances, you can determine the accessible zones. And where they overlap is the area where you've got to make sure nobody is present. But what a lot of people find when they do this is that the area is well within their control. So let's have a look at what this exposure is about. And first of all, we'll start with looking at the electric field, the E field, around a dipole antenna. So the black line is a dipole. This dipole is way up in the air. And you can see the red zones are where the strongest parts of the electric field are. As we would expect, they're where the voltage is stronger, which is at the two ends of the dipole. The H field, on the other hand, has its maximum strength in the middle. In the case of an inverted V, of course, that's further away from the ground. If you put those together and run a detailed antenna model, then what you can do is to mark out the contours where, for a given power input, 400 watts, 200 watts, 50 watts from your transmitter, for the particular configuration, you can work out where the exclusion zones are, in this case, on a vertical slice through the antenna. What you can also do, and by the way, if none of those exclusion zones reach the ground level, the person is now represented as a spot where his feet are. If none of those, even at 400 watts input, touch the ground, then people can be anywhere at ground level without being exposed to non-compliant conditions. If we look down on that same diagram, then what we see at ground level, there's the same zones. This time it looks like a bow tie. And I just point out that these distances are only 1 or 2 meters, even for 400 watts. That's all well and good for a resonant dipole, but as you change the frequency, so the peaks of the E and the H and the combined fields will move up and down the antenna. So what we recommend is the definition of rectangular exclusion zones. The blue boundary in this case at around 2 meters for 400 watts is the exclusion zone for this dipole. We have published the work of lots and lots of modeling of this. In fact, 2,600 runs were run. And what we've come up with is a table. This is the bit that the amateurs can use. So for any part of the providing any part of the radiating structure is more than 2.3 meters for the 80 meter band, is more than 2.3 meters above ground level, then you will be compliant. If you can't achieve the 2.3, or perhaps a more realistic example here is 400 watts on 80 meters, where it becomes 5.3 meters high, then you would also need to take into account the separation needed at ground level. And what the case that we had posted on the website is about, it says that if you keep a separation of 2.2 meters away, then you will achieve compliance. Now that's also an important number because you want to try and make sure nobody can actually touch your antenna because of the problems that could be caused by touch currents. If we look at a different example, in this case a 40 meter inverted V, then we see, I'm only showing half the antenna here, then we see a similar pattern, and in this case for the 40 meter dipole, the horizontal separations are between 1/2 and 2 meters. You only need to keep 2 meters away at 400 watts. What this diagram shows is 3 zones. The red zone, which is where the field strength is well exceeded. The amber zone is an area that we recommend is treated as an exclusion zone, and the green zone is the area which is the compliance zone where people can be present. This is all described in pre-assessed configuration number 1, which is on the website. You can do the similar thing for a 2 meter Yagi. And here for 2 meters, voice FM, 100 watts, talking half the time, 50%, with 18 meters of RG213 feeder, a 6-element Yagi, then you aren't compliant automatically because the power level is 434 watts. But your compliance distance is 6.7 meters. Now 6.2 of that is taken up by the antenna being 8 meters up in the air, which means the separation horizontally at ground level is only 2.4 meters. So there is another factor that you can take into account, particularly for beam-like antennas like the 2 meter Yagi, and that is that the antenna gain is on the bore site of the antenna. The person is not on the bore site, so you can produce a less conservative compliance distance if you enter a directivity factor in the calculator. That's how many dBs down the antenna pattern will be when it's pointing horizontally, what the field will be down at where the person is in the elevation side lobe. So you can repeat this for accessible portions, and it gives you the exclusion zone to avoid people being present. There's a list there which Ofcom had published in their guidance document of the sort of things that you can record. I'm not expecting you to take them all in, but they are there. They're well defined, and you will be able to come back to them later in the presentation. So what is good practice to achieve this compliance? We should all aim to be compliant by design. I would recommend that you always follow manufacturers' instructions and guidelines. And yes, that does require you to read them. We also recommend you follow our advice with the way you set up your system. And you'll find that not only does that advice help you be compliant with the new condition, but actually makes your radio work better too. If you use the RSGB Ofcom calculator to give a compliance distance, that's it. You can use any calculation you want, but if you use a different calculation, you have to convince Ofcom, if they ask, why your answers are correct. Simplest thing to do is to separate and set up and operate to these pre-assessed configurations, which we'll be publishing more of in RADCOM and on the website. And if you end up with any exclusion zones, then either don't transmit when people are in them, turn the power down, or adjust your station such that people will not be in them. And generally speaking, if compliance is not achieved, not demonstrated, there are other ways using advanced modeling that you can make small tweaks to your system until you can demonstrate compliance. Perhaps the most encouraging thing of all is Ofcom's stated aim in this, which is they want to foster a climate of compliance, not a high-handed enforcement approach, but they will act against reckless individuals. And I must say thank you to all those in the EMF team who are helping us on this, particularly Ian, GM3, Sierra Echo Kilo, and Peter, Golf 4 Delta Sierra Echo. Great deal of work that they put in, many hundreds and hundreds of hours have been put in by some very skillful people, and I feel privileged to be part of their team. So, I don't know if any questions have come in, David, while I've been rattling away, but I'll hand back to you.
Hello, John. Thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions actually from somebody. But first, I'd like to remind you at home now, if you'd like to ask a question and haven't already done so, please do it as soon as you can, either on YouTube chat or the BATC messaging. Now, if you have been watching the formal part of our AGM just before this webinar on YouTube, then you may have to refresh your screen, your browser, to see the live chat feature. So please do that now. If you want to ask a question, then you should see the chat channel. And don't forget to include your first name and your call sign if you have one as well. We have got a question from John Harrison. It says, let's have ground-fed antenna. Both my neighbours fall within my exclusion zone. We keep seeing examples up on masts and towers, which lots of us can't have. So can we see numbers for 40 feet long plots? That's John Harrison.
Yes, John, I mean, you have asked this question to me directly as well, and I will be answering it. But the simple point is that we have to move on next to model vertical antennas and inverted L's, etc. We will be doing that. But the next step really is to make sure that Ofcom don't change their guidance or calculator when they finish their consultation and come out on May the 18th with what the final step will be. Once we've got that, we will get the group to undertake the modelling of the vertical antennas, the inverted L antennas, and other commonly used antennas, particularly down at the HF ranges.
So is that something, John, that you're expecting to have for the 18th of May when this starts becoming in force?
No, well, the 18th of May 2022, yes.
Oh, okay.
18th of May is when the regulations get introduced, and what we need to know is the final configuration of those before we actually do all of the work. I mean, when we're doing thousands of runs, we don't want to have to redo them if they change the limits slightly.
No, okay, understood. John also has a PS there saying my neighbours are out in the garden at the moment on a Saturday afternoon. So does that mean no radio, or is he wrong, he says?
Well, I don't know his particular detail, but the answer is it doesn't mean no radio. It may mean he needs to turn his power down a little bit, or I think his particular problem is on the 80, 40 and 20 meter bands from memory of his questions before.
Sure, okay. Got another question here from, all I've got of a name is Uncle Remus, but he says, or she says, will Ofcom check?
I'm not qualified to answer that question. All they need to do to check for compliance is the same as they need to have done in the past to check whether you are staying within your license condition for maximum power. It's the same equipment, but you know, whether they will check or not, I don't know. I suspect if they are told there is a problem, they will do some spot checks.
Okay. And this is all really for the safety, isn't it? It's being accountable for your station and safety for the public. I have a little question myself, actually, just to add in, if I may. So if this mainly is okay, you've got maybe a decent plot of land with lots of clearance around it, do you have to make any provision for example, when people come visit, when the postman delivers, or you know, you have other people come round who you're not expecting, or the general public? Do you have to cover that in your assessment as well?
Well, basically, if any member of the general public, which includes your family, friends and visitors, are present in an exclusion zone, then you should not transmit. But presumably, if people are visiting, I mean, the postman is an example where he's going to walk in and walk out unless he stops to talk. And he's not going to be there for 6 minutes, so he's not going to be exposed. But people who are maybe having a picnic in your garden or a barbecue, yes, you must not transmit at power when they are present.
Yeah, sure, okay. I've got Vic152, that's all I've got as a name. What about radials, he says?
Radials come in two types, elevated and buried. There will need to be a separation from radials, and as part of the verticals that we're going to do, we will be trying to measure how much that is, but we suspect if they are buried radials, it will be less than the separation from the actual radiating part of the antenna.
Sure, actually, John, sorry to interrupt, but Vic's come back with another point just straight after that. Are radials part of an antenna, therefore exclusion zone starts from where the radials end?
There will be an exclusion zone from where the radials end, but it might be quite a small distance. We don't know till we've done the modelling. Okay,
thank you. Steve F4 VTF says thank you very much for the detailed explanation, John. Several other people saying thank you as well. Andy Cowley has said been great, but how about CB radios? So I guess, at least in my day, they were 27 megs. How does it apply to them?
Well, Ofcom have said that it applies to all radios, licensed or unlicensed, and that they are setting up the conditions to apply to everybody equally. Right,
okay. Pete M0OFM says, how does this affect stroke meter operation, I guess mobile that is, operation, especially those of us who use radio from vehicles while commuting?
The conditions will still apply, so you will need to keep a separation distance. If you're not commuting in London and you're on the move, of course, you're helped by the 6-minute averaging interval, in that if you stop at lights, you can stop transmitting, and when you're moving along, providing there's nobody within the compliance distance for more than 6 minutes, then you should be okay.
Okay. Dale MM0INH says, similar to John H's question earlier, antennas where the houses are part of the antenna supports either as a pole or the chimney or as a support for a dipole leg. So he says that modelling for that would be really useful as well later on.
Yes, we have to. I mean, we have published the modelling for dipoles, for HF dipoles for the 4080 and 160, and the separation is only a couple of meters at the end. It becomes more difficult if the dipole passes over the roof, and we will model that. I should say, with all of this modelling, if we have any other experts listening to this who have the experience of using the NEC 5 modelling tool, which is what we're using, then we would welcome their help in doing and developing some of the models.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure you'd welcome. You told me earlier how many thousands of emails you've got sitting waiting for you. So, yeah, once again, we're very grateful for all you're doing for us today, John. I've got Uncle Remus has come back. I'm guessing he might be a CB user because he says, I think we should be licensed again. If we have to conform with such measures, bring back the license, he says. So I'm just guessing that might be his handle, Uncle Remus. Pete Hayward, M0VPH, says, I contacted John regarding my setup last week, so I guess you'll be getting around to that amongst the thousands of emails, John. John Harrison's come back, G0UBE, and says, as I see it, my 400 watt license isn't worth the paper it's written on. QRP with a limited antenna is useless from here. I've been trying for 30 years. Have you got any rays of hope or any thoughts for him? I think, by the way, sorry, John, just to explain, I think he was the gentleman who gave us the very first question today, which is where he has neighbours and things that could get in that exclusion zone quite easily.
Yeah, he has been corresponding with me anyway, and we've pointed out some things. I have said to him several times already that I would be very surprised if we have to give up transmitting, and I would, even with his, I think it's a 40-foot garden, is it? He's got 43 foot.
I think it was, yes, yeah.
I think that there will be configurations that he can use, possibly not at 400 watts, but certainly he'll find configurations he can use at 50 and 100 watts. And, hopefully we can help him. But as you hinted, I've had over 4,000 emails on this topic from nearly 400 different individuals. So I apologise if I'm not answering them as quickly as people would like.
I'm sure,
and
but
some of them I've had 10 or 12 emails. Some people have had 10 or 12 emails from. So.
Sure. Actually, John, I'm going to put a link now on the screen for everybody. It was in amongst your slides. This is a very good part of the RSGB website to go to, though, if you're trying to find out more information about this. It's rsgb.org/EMF. So if you go to that, you'll find lots of information that's particularly relevant for radio amateurs as well. We've had another couple of comments regarding CB. A couple of people have said that they think that the limits on CB is 4 watts. And then someone else said, Gordon Hudson GM4 SVM says, I thought it only applied to transmissions over 10 watts, so that CB wouldn't be affected if it is still the limit, 4 watts.
Well, if it's 4 watts EIRP, then it is below 10 watts. If it's 4 watts ERP, then normally it would be below 10 watts EIRP, but it does depend on the antenna.
Okay.
But the Ofcom have done it for what they call all spectrum users.
All right, John, thank you. Got a couple of nice compliments, lots of compliments for you as well. Jim G3YLA over on BATC says, great presentation, John. Very helpful, thank you. Chris Carini has GW4 RER says, excellent and clear explanation. Thanks for all you do. And John Harrison's come back and said, again, a big thank you, John, for all of your work and all of your team as well. One of the things I was going to ask about mobile operation, because I know quite a few of us only have maybe the time to work mobile, and someone's already mentioned it today. Do you see that maybe a sign on a vehicle, maybe near the rear window, if that's where you've got your antenna or near where you've got your antenna, is that going to help you be compliant more if it says warning, radiation emanates from this antenna?
Well, one of the ways that Ofcom say that you can protect your exclusion zone is by putting up notices advising the public. I mean, for example, if you drive off in your vehicle and you set up at an SES, then if you put up notices and keep people out of the exclusion zone, then you will be compliant. And the point I regularly make to people is that if you're going to conduct an SES, then you need to do a risk assessment. Part of that risk assessment will be the mast or whatever's holding the antenna up falling down. And I'm almost certain that there is no configuration where the separation of the mast falling down for a reasonable antenna is going to be less than the EMF required separation.
Okay. All right, I think that helps there very much, John. Thank you. Just a reminder now, because we're coming towards the end of our webinar, so if you've been waiting to ask a question, then do ask it now. And if you were watching on the AGM, the formal part of the AGM on YouTube earlier, then do refresh your screen if you can't see the messages coming up, the live chat, to ask us that. Pete M0VPH says, I have had a conversion, James Brazen, I'm not quite sure what that means, a conversation that possibly is, with James Brazen from Ofcom. He went through my setup and showed me that I am compliant using 400 watts, using a Hustler 5BTV vertical ground mounted. So some good news there from Pete. Do you have any experience of that particular vertical?
Yes, I've got one in my back garden.
All right.
It's about 5 meters away from a public footpath.
So is that, I mean, I'm putting you on the spot now. So is that the sort of time? No. But is that the sort of distance, John, that you've got to be from that?
All right. Because I haven't had time to work out my
I tell you, example. I know a man who can help you. Oh, it's you. Sorry. But you haven't had time. No, quite right. The transmitters, we've still got people talking about CB here, which is great because I must admit, I can remember 4 watts being mentioned when that first 2781 or something came in. But people are saying that it's now 12 watts SSB. And in fact, someone has said now transmitters is their name on here. It says UKCB permits 19.8 watts EIRP, yet the EMF reg does not apply. So I don't know about that. I'm really sorry. Maybe John, unless you've got any other knowledge about the UKCB permits, have you?
Well, as I said, I have no knowledge about CB. I've not been a CB, I'm afraid. But when we have had meetings with Ofcom, and it really is a question to them, they have said that any person who transmits, whether it's licensed or unlicensed, above 10 watts EIRP will break the ICMERP regulations unless they do an assessment and keep a record.
Right, okay, so I think...
So I should rephrase that. We'll break the Ofcom implementation of the ICMERP regulations. There are no ICMERP regulations.
Okay, there is lots of other information, by the way, as well as on the RSGB website about this generally for radio spectrum users on the Ofcom website as well, of course. Rosalind Wicks says, can you add more antennas to the XL calculator, i.e. a doublet, end fed, etc.? And also, if we use this to 1998 levels, what happens if we move to 2020? Will we need to redo all of this? That's Rosalind.
Two excellent questions, Rosalind. The first one is, in order to add more antennas, what I need is more volunteers to actually build up a simple table for each of the antennas and each of the frequencies on which it operates the gain in dBi. Once we can do that, we can add any number of antennas, but there are just not enough hours in the day for me and my team to actually fill it in. So anybody who's here who wants to help, something that's easy to do at home, I can send you a spreadsheet. You can add your columns, we'll get the new rows, we'll get somebody else to check them, and then we can put them straight into the spreadsheet because all of the limits are looked up in data tables. We're very thankful to Alwyn, who did that for us for the feeders. So the feeder is now fully implemented, but the antennas aren't. The second question is the area where most of the work is going on at the moment, and that is ICMERP 2020 limits. The reason that becomes difficult, and the reason that we're having discussions with HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, PHE, Public Health England, and Ofcom, is that there are requirements for peak limits in the ICMERP 2020 which weren't there in ICNA 1998, and they are much more stringent. For example, the E field must, below 10 megahertz, be less than 83 volts per meter, whereas the previous limits were 2 to 3 times higher than that.
I guess we know a lot more about this sort of thing now as well. I've got Nick M1DDD says, thanks John and David, just clarifying timing of when the legislation comes into force. The 18th of May is when it starts, isn't it, John? But can you clarify it? And also on the different bands as well.
The 18th of May is the date at which Ofcom say they're going to implement the change to the licence conditions. Because they realise that this is a new requirement, they have allowed 6 months for frequencies above 10 megahertz. And they will not be able to say you are in breach of the condition within that period, because they're giving you 6 months to go away and do the work. That was for frequencies above 10 megahertz. For frequencies below 10 megahertz, and this is for 2 reasons that I'll come to at the end, they're giving us 12 months from May 2021, which takes us to May 2022. The 2 reasons are that the antenna structures are bigger, and therefore the separation distances, and in particular being close into the antenna in what's called the reactive near field, is difficult. The second reason is the one I just mentioned, which is to do with when you go below 10 megahertz, then you have the problems of the peak limits for the electrostimulation type impacts.
Okay, thank you, John. Still got a few people commenting, and it's not that I'm ignoring those at all. I mean, David G0EVA says the amount of work involved in compliance and the limitations show the effect of this directive, 100 years of radio transmissions and then this pointless imposition. He says, well, I don't think we can really comment on the politics of it. I'm sure John would feel the same as well. The Ofcom did actually put this out for consultation, and you had until a week or 2 ago, I think, to actually make your feelings known, didn't you, John? So
there were 3 stages of consultation, and the other thing we should do is really thank the people who helped us and supported us by putting things in. There were 255 responses went in from amateurs, and they resulted in 10 significant changes to the legislation, all in our benefit. The biggest one of all is the fact that the RSGB can now do pre-assessed configurations, which, if followed, will be recognised by Ofcom as being compliant. I mean, that is a really major step forward, because without that, you would have to do all the detailed modelling yourself, whereas we can get blanket compliance, which, if the setups are followed by any amateur, will make them compliant.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I mean, again, there's quite a lot on here on CB. I'm honestly not ignoring it. Many of us have come into this hobby from an early interest in CB, and then come into amateur radio. So we're certainly not against it, but there's too much really for us to go into. But one person did put up a comment about CB. That was Steve Morton, who says the information on power limits for CB are contained in the Ofcom document located here. He hasn't got that on there. So in other words, on the Ofcom website, you will find the information that applies to all radio spectrum users, including CBers as well. So please look on there as well. We've got another comment from David G81IDL. Says, from 10 to 30 megs, I only use a magnetic loop 1 meter in diameter. How does this affect the calculations, he says?
Well, we've actually had a volunteer do a lot of work on mag loops, and one of the experts on our committee from ARRL, Kai, is also an expert on mag loops. So we hope that in the not too distant future, we will be able to put out a pre-assessed configuration for mag loop type antennas. And one sort of comment, without having all the detailed modelling in front of me, is that the danger from touching the very high voltage at the capacitor means you probably want to stay 2 or 3 meters away And that, surprisingly enough, is probably what you need to be compliant with EMF.
Okay, thank you. Question, just a clarification, I think, of the dates from Nick Gar 7. So the initial change to license conditions is May 2021, brackets, i.e. 6 metres and 12 metres and plus above 12 metres, right? Or is it May 2020? It is May 2021, isn't it, from the 18th of May? But then they have 6 months to comply with the reporting and everything.
For frequencies above 10 megahertz and 12 months for frequencies below 10 megahertz.
Yep.
So the time at which they can enforce is November this year for above 10 megahertz and May next year, if I got the dates wrong, 2022.
I think it's just that, to be honest, John, I think we're both guilty of not mentioning the date, the year. So
Yeah.
we are talking about here, this comes in May 2021, so
May
next
the
month.
It's the target, yep.
Yep, and of course, well, people may be watching this in months or even years to come. So we are talking about May. We're talking now in April 2021, and we're talking about this coming in the 18th of May 2021, and then progressively either 6 months or 12 months from there. But all these details and lots more you can find on the RSGB link that I mentioned, which is rsgb.org/EMF. John, M0JBMs. John, I have a DX Commander which has radials that are lying just about under gravel that takes up most of my garden. I think I'll have to take it down or maybe just run 10 watts, he asks.
I think you'll be able to run more than 10 watts, but we need to get the job done properly. Me sort of standing here and saying what I think isn't helping. We need to do the assessment and prove it.
Yeah. A couple of suggestions here. Dave Delahaye suggested that people could have CCTV and keep an eye, maybe when they're in their shack, and keep an eye on if anybody comes down in the garden and things. And of course, if they've made the effort to do that, then they could make sure that the public or nobody else could get near the antennas when you're transmitting. That's if you haven't got anything going outside the curtilage of your ground, I guess. Because Kevin Earl has also come back that and said for remote cameras to monitor possible public or neighbours coming in.
Yeah, I have cameras on my antennas, and also I know of somebody who's put up PIR beams.
Right. Okay.
So that, you know, if somebody crosses them, then you get an alarm, you stop transmitting while you go out and see who's there.
Okay.
And a lot of the CCTV cameras, of course, have human movement detection, the doorbells, for example.
Indeed.
And you could set one of those up and it would alert you if somebody was in the area.
Yes, that's a very good idea as well. So thanks to those of you who suggested that, to Dave and to Kevin there. M0JBM's John says, I've got a DX Commander which has radials that are lying just... Oh no, I've read that one, I'm sorry. John M7CPT says, amateur radio on the air. Do you have anyone working on T2FD or TTFD antennas, he says?
I don't know what they are, sorry.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I think it's important to say, and John has already mentioned it here, is you can imagine, John, like many of us in the RSGB, are volunteers, and he's got quite a team working on this. But if you've got the knowledge and experience and some time to give to this, and you maybe have got a particular antenna yourself, and you can help John and his team, then please do write to him. I mean, at the moment, I know John is besieged with lots of emails, people asking for some help on things. But conversely, if you can offer some help, you can either contact John via the RSGB, or maybe, John, if you'd like to give out your email address now, I guess it's your call sign at, is it? Would you like to do that?
It's Mike Zero, Juliet Alpha Victor, or as I like to say, Mike Zero, just another volunteer, at rsgb.org.uk.
All right, so if you can help John, and not just ask for help, but if you can help in any way, maybe you could just take on one project to look at one antenna. I know that would really help the team, wouldn't it? Trevor M0BPU says, I've got PEPs on all sides. I have arranged my STL mag loop on a safe. I have arranged a proximity detector to monitor, as I cannot see if the person is in the garden. Is this acceptable, he says?
I believe it is.
Okay, short and sweet. Thank you very much. Dave Goodwin, M0TTJ, says, are we required to submit our assessment to Ofcom, or will it be sufficient to make the assessment and retain it until requested by Ofcom, i.e. a soft copy of the output of the calculator enough? Good question, Dave.
Yes, it is sufficient, and they don't want you to submit it. In Germany, you have to submit them, but in the UK, you just have to have kept them a PDF on your computer of a PDF copy of our spreadsheet, as an example. The front sheet on your computer is all that's needed.
So that's one of the advantages of using the RSGB adapted version of the calculator, isn't it? That it's got a lot of the relevant things for radio amateurs, the types of antennas and cables and everything that we use regularly. And of course, you'll be adding to this as other volunteers help and give you more information about specific aerials as well.
But the calculator also gives you the opportunity in the beige boxes to fill in the details of your configuration when you did the assessment. So it's all in one.
Yeah, it's all, and you can just print that and put it with your license, I guess, would be a really good way of doing it. Then
or keep it on a file on your desktop.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, keep it electronic or real.
I'm all for preserving trees.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. John M7 CPT comes back and just explains what his terms were. And FTD was folded, terminated dipoles. He did mention that earlier on. The tilted, and the TTFD was a tilted, terminated, folded dipole. Essexham have come back and said that as well. So do you have any specific advice on those? I guess is what they're asking, is if you've got anything specific on those particular antenna?
We haven't yet, but I would be surprised if they are significantly different to a normal dipole. They're just shorter because of the terminations. I don't know. I've not dealt with them. So.
Sure. Okay, that's fine. Well, again, a plea from John and from me. If you can help with any of these, if you've got these particular antenna and you can help get some information on them, then please have a look at his website, get in touch with John, and I'm sure he'll welcome that information, that feedback in here. John, from Mike Meadows, sorry, this is. John, I have a covert 100-foot circumference, a continuous loop at 10 AGL running above ground level, I guess, running along plastic gutters and eaves at both ends, tuned with a CG 3000 auto tuner, 160 to 10 meters. Clearly, I'm inside the loop. So I guess he's asking, though, how that would affect. But him being inside is not the problem, is it? It's really protecting against the public.
Well, if it's only him in his house, then there are no requirements for amateurs. I mean, in many countries they use occupational limits, but in the UK, Ofcom have not required that. So if he's the only one in the house at the time, then he can do what he likes.
Okay, all right.
We wouldn't recommend it. We would recommend that he stays outside the occupational exclusion zone, but, Ofcom have not put that requirement on.
No, this is all about others, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nick Gar 7 says, does the assessment apply to the ham operator, herself, or just others? He says
it doesn't apply. You are not required to maintain the compliance distance for radio amateurs who either the owner of the station or other people working with him. And that's specifically dealt with in the Ofcom guidance documents for amateurs.
Okay, thank you. On BATC now, Jim G3YLA has got a question. Is it worth the RSGB generating a planning statement relating to need to vertical separation for antennas based on this new directive, i.e. a planning applications to councils and things like that?
We are trying very hard to keep planning and EMF separate, and I think if you want advice on planning, you should use the I've forgotten the exact email address, but it'll be something like planning@rsgb.org.uk.
Okay, I think you could find that by looking at the RSGB website, rsgb.org. Terry G3VFC says, calculations using estimated properties of the Earth and other environment must be, at best, a guess. What hope for affordable or communal test and measuring equipment, he says?
Well, even if you have measuring equipment, that will give you an accurate field, then you still have to follow a very detailed procedure in actually taking the measurements. So it is difficult. The calculations are all designed to be conservative. In other words, they are designed to slightly overestimate the compliance distance. So because of that, they are still our recommended way of doing the compliance. Now, validation is a difficult task, and one of the ways that we are validating the models that we're using is to run them on NEC 4.2 and NEC 5, which, although they sound like the same product, are completely different modeling and calculation engines. And if the segmentation that we do for the antennas gives the same answers in both ways, then that is confirmation as to the efficacy of the answers.
Okay, John, thank you. Dave Delahaye has said, are there plans to have a web-based calculator running on the RSGB website?
We would like to provide a web-based calculator, but we have had a couple of people recently point out to us that they're worried about the security of a web-based calculator. So the original reason for making it web-based was that we were having difficulty with it working on different free spreadsheet programs. I think it's now working on quite a big selection. The latest problem that I heard of was somebody had trouble with a Raspberry Pi and LibreOffice, but a lot of the early problems of it not running on older versions of the spreadsheets have gone away, and certainly while we are prototyping it, we're going to carry on running the spreadsheets because they're much easier to develop and check than a detailed web-based calculator. But it's still on the plan to develop one if needed, but not in the next couple of months.
No, and I guess maybe it's another case of asking you if you've got expertise in something like that, web-based calculators and things. I'm sure that John and his team would welcome some help or advice if you can offer it. Dave actually came back and also added, field days are a breeze to manage as long as everyone on the site are radio amateurs. All radio amateurs are exempt from being excluded in the exclusion zones, he says.
Yep, that's what we just said as well.
Okay. NR, just initials there, I'm afraid, is what if you're running 5 watts RF on VHF, UHF with an X50 collinear antenna with wires and CE4 FM digital? That's one of those digital modes, isn't it? C4 FM. I don't know. I mean, I guess you need a bit more information, but that's 5 watts basically on an X50 collinear on VHF, UHF. Does the mode have much to do with it, John?
The mode affects the averaging, but if he's on VHF, he'll probably be running 100% on an FM mode, which doesn't reduce the power level. But it does have a very significant effect. SSB, for example, is only a fifth of the power of VHF FM.
Right. So, I mean, I believe C4 FM is one of these hybrid sort of digital modes as well. So
there'll certainly be 100. Well, FT8, I think, is 42% because of the transmit-receive periods. But all of those things do affect the results.
Yeah. Essex Hams have come and said, maybe worth mentioning applicability to family. We've been told that family and non-licensed visitors are general public. Can John confirm that this is his understanding too?
Yes.
Okay, right. I think we're getting there now, really. I think
we actually asked Ofcom that question and they confirmed it back to us.
Right. Thank you. I don't think I've covered this one. Terry G3VFC says calculations using estimated properties of the Earth. Oh no, I have mentioned that one, I think, haven't I? Sorry, there's quite a few questions. I'm trying to group them together, so I ask them at the same sort of time. John Harrison said, I've put an antenna into the calculator. If you change 50 watts input or 400 watts input, the EIRP changes as you would expect, but the exclusion distance does not change. Is that correct, he asks?
It will be if the exclusion distance is less than the height of the mast.
Right. Okay, so that's there.
I think he is meaning compliance distance, but yeah. It also depends on the bands, because what Ofcom have done is to limit, because of the problem of being in the radiated near field, whereby the equation that you use to convert from EIRP to either electric or magnetic field strengths relies on a circular wave and 377 ohms of impedance, wave impedance. That doesn't apply close into the antenna. So what Ofcom have done with their version 2 of the calculator is to stop it at HF from giving answers which are less than lambda on 2 pi, the reactive near field distance of the antenna. So they won't give an answer that's less than that, but they are going to revisit that calculator and look again at what they provide, what we provide, and they provide below 10 megahertz after the end of this referendum that has just finished on the 18th of April.
Fine, thank you, John. Just 2 more questions. I'm going to leave it there then, I think, because I know that you've been on this call since 12 o'clock when the AGM started, so it's going to be quite a day. From Andy Cowley, VK3UM EMR software works on an all-op system, he says, so that's good advice. Brian Morrison says, need to know feeder loss, antenna gain, antenna gain and pattern, and antenna distance from people. With 5 watts, can't believe you can exceed limits for an external antenna.
Well, anybody who works in microwave will know that you can get 20 dB gain antennas, which was much less than 5 watts. For the VK3UM system, the Australian regulations use different limits, and unfortunately the author of that excellent piece of software is now SK, so getting it updated would be difficult. There are many different calculators around, but you've got to watch that for Ofcom to accept them, they have to be working to ICNIRP 1998 and eventually ICNIRP 2020 limits. And I don't know of any calculator out there at the moment published. RSGB has one that it hasn't published yet that works to ICNIRP 2020 levels. The other one that is quite common is the IARU Region 1 called ICNIRP Calc. I was getting disturbed by movement in the background.
That's all right. We just saw a mysterious hand appearing then, don't worry. But it did look a little odd.
That's my wife.
That is I'm sure you have definitely deserved it. John, I think I'm going to leave it there because I know we've got a couple of other just comments, but mainly, honestly, people saying thank you very much. I know you and your team have put a lot of work into that, and I know it's only just beginning as well. And those 3,000 or 4,000 emails that you've got to get through. Just like to remind you again at home, if you'd like to know more information, obviously the Ofcom website who have this directive, then there's lots of information on there. And there's another web address as well, rsgb.org/EMF. Lots of information on there. But John, as I said, it's been a very long day for you, I know. So thank you ever so much for today. And thank you for all the work that you and your team are doing. And I'm sure, and if you can help John, by the way, and his team, don't forget, it's not just take, if you can give something back as well. John's just a volunteer, as is all his team. So if you can help at all, then please get in touch. But John Rogers, M0JV, thank you ever so much for today.
Thank you, David, and thank you everybody for your useful questions. It's those, we've had a lot of help in developing this stuff from people sending in comments. And I just ask you to bear with me if you have sent me an email and I haven't answered. I don't mind a gentle reminder, but I would prefer that to a complaint that I haven't responded yet.
Yeah, and keep an eye on the website, of course, because that's an easy way for you to communicate instantly with lots of people, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, John, thank you ever so much, and have that well-earned cup of tea and something to eat, no doubt, as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, John. There we are. And just to let you know that the RSGB produces other online webinars such as the monthly Tonight at 8 series. So to find out more or to send us any comments or feedback, please visit rsgb.org/webinars. And remember, if you subscribe to the RSGB's YouTube channel, you'll automatically be notified of all upcoming webinars, as well as other new videos and presentations from the Society on a wide range of amateur radio topics. We hope you've enjoyed this special presentation and look forward to seeing you again very soon. But for now, this is David G7ERP signing off and clear. Bye-bye.